Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
Julia decided at an early age, girls are either beautiful or smart. The girl knew very well she could choose, and she chose to be smart. The example of her older sister Helen was in front of her eyes. Everyone around her admired her beauty. Her hair was light blonde, silky clean, her eyes mermaid green, a figure they call model-like. Helen from an early age was focused only on her looks. She read a lot, but it was fashion magazines with advice on makeup, diet, and so on. And Valen's girlfriends were exactly the same. Julia thought they were pretty, frivolous, fools. The mother, who lived alone 2 daughters, had high hopes for the eldest. If you marry Helen, we'll live happily ever after. Julia then was still a very young girl, studied in the 4th or 5th grade. The girl was frankly perplexed. How can one put the responsibility for her happiness and well-being on some other person? Did the mother, who had been burned herself, not make the right conclusions? Once Julia asked her mother directly, "You married your father for his money too. And he left us, went to a younger and prettier, even and left nothing to you or the children, because she had a good appetite. And now you teach the tape the same thing, so that it is the same." Splash, nodded Mom. Helen is quite different from us. First of all, young, and secondly, she is much prettier than me. And she has me. It was me who had to come do everything myself, and I'll give you a hint and teach you everything. It will be good for you too, if you listen to me. Julia only sighed heavily. Her mother was beautiful, kind, but too frivolous. Both her mother and Helen lived with rose-colored glasses on their eyes. They all dreamed of a beautiful life. They believed that looks were the determining factor in a woman's success. But that's about it. Julia differed from her peers in her character, always being pragmatic, responsible, farsighted. And she clearly understood that to achieve something in this life, you have to work hard. And the options that her mother and older sister had in mind, the rich male benefactors, were all unreliable, fragile, illusory. Helen jokingly called her little sister a nerd. Her mother was always trying to remake Julia, to impose her point of view on her daughter. The most interesting parent sincerely believed that she wished her child well. "I'm worried about your future." "Well, how can you not understand? You're beautiful, we got such. You got the best of me and your father. When you finish school, we'll find you a wealthy fiancé. Just don't be like that." Then like cheerful and smiling. "No, thanks. After school, I will go to study economics." Julia answered. "Well, do you know what the competition is?" Helen always started to argue at this point. "You either have to be 7 eyes in the head there, or you have to have a good deal." "Yeah," Mom sighed. "We can't afford commercial education, and you can't get in for free." But Julia, trying not to listen to the arguments of her sister and mother, strived for her goal. Day and night she sat over textbooks, looked for additional courses on the internet, mostly free, because her mother, who worked as a cashier in the local supermarket, had no money for her daughter's education, and her father almost did not participate in the children's lives, as he had a new family. No, he still transferred some pennies, but everything was limited to that. No communication, no support or help in difficult situations. Julia knew from childhood that he could not be counted on. The girl deep down wanted at least once to meet and talk to her second parent. It seemed to her that perhaps the character she went just in him, because the mother and Helen Julia did not resemble at all. But he did not seek to meet his daughters, and Julia, she didn't want to impose. And it was scary to face indifference, or even worse, dislike of a native man. Her father was a businessman who owned a chain of stores. She had no time at all for student parties, going to clubs, and other such entertainments. Sometimes, of course, she wanted to go out and have some fun. But the girl realized that every minute counted. Her time was too precious. Besides, there was no money. Her mother tried to replenish her daughter's card with a small amount every month. Julia knew that it was a significant part of her parents' salary and was very grateful to her. It was not enough, very little. But still, it was the help from her mother that allowed Julia to stay afloat. Especially after the 3rd year, when suddenly something in the university clinic changed, and students were obliged to pay for the dormitory. And before, you could live there for free. Julia saved money on literally everything. But she didn't have time. She knew that she was going to her goal, which meant that sooner or later everything would be fine. Everything will be as she had dreamed. But on New Year's Eve, there was an event that made Julia reconsider her plans and turned her whole life upside down. It happened at that hectic time when before the New Year students try to pass all credits in time to start the winter session after the holiday without debts. Julia was just preparing for a credit in economic history when she received a call from her sister. Helen's picture popped up on the screen. On it, the girl smiled widely and looked like a star. Julia immediately realized something was wrong. Helen would not call her at the third hour of the night. It's her. Julia is awake, studying for her exams. And her sister should be having her 7th dream by now. Mom's in trouble. Helen's voice rang through the phone. It seems that she was close to hysterics. Come over. What's wrong? Julia felt her limbs grow young and her stomach felt empty for some reason. Anxiety squeezed her heart ice cold, and a bus hit her with a rusty hand. What when she was alive? But it was impossible to get any intelligible answers from the Italian. She was already sobbing and sobbing into the tube, dropping only a few insignificant phrases. Mostly they were wails about how she was scared and bad now. As if the trouble happened in the evening, but Alina was informed only now, just a couple of minutes ago. And she immediately dialed her sister. Of course, there was no talk about any credits and exams at that moment. In the morning, Julia took the first flight home. She was almost the only passenger at the bus station at such an early hour. Julia found her sister in a terrible state, her hair shot up, her face swollen with tears. In her arms, she held her youngest daughter, a very young Molly. Helen was already a mother of many children. Her eldest son Larry, then 2 girls, Christina and Molly. None of the fathers were involved in raising the children. Princes, sons of rich parents, refused to raise offspring and bathed in pennies with the elements. With Helen, they were just having fun, with nothing serious in mind. And that one kept stepping on the same rake on purpose to get pregnant in the hope of finding a happy, strong family. If something happens to her, how will I be alone with them? Helen looked at Julia with confused eyes, as if expecting her to offer a way out. But Julia, she was ready at this moment to hit her sister unbeknownst to her mother. And she only thinks of herself. How it happened. They had a corporate party, and Helen is machine carrying her daughter. Drunk, I guess. They told me Mom was crossing the road in the wrong place. Jumped out in front of that bus. The driver couldn't do anything. He's in shock himself. He's kind of in the hospital now, too. He had a heart attack right there on the spot. Bye-bye. By the time we got there, I got a call late last night, and I called you right away. So Mom's alive. Julia checked. That was the most important thing to her. What hospital is she in? Morozov's. Julia jumped out of the house and called a cab. He seemed to be making good money. But all his property was prudently written down to his new wife, so that his ex-wife and children would have no claim to anything. It looked ugly, petty, even mean. In theory, Julia should have been just as resentful of her father as her mother, just as Helen was. But Julia had a dream. To study economics, start her own business, and one day meet her father on a case. A joint project, a lucrative contract, something like that. Let him see what his daughter had accomplished on her own, without his help. And then maybe they can talk on equal footing. And Julia achieved her goal. She got into the Faculty of Economics, where she was so eager. How happy she was when she saw herself on the list of enrolled. Screamed right in front of the computer monitor, jumped from happiness to the ceiling. She went crazy. Helen came into the room with little Larry in her arms. She had recently become a mother and given birth to a son by a rich man. He paid child support, but he did not want to communicate with his mother and Larry himself. Needless to say, these alimonies were pennies. Standard scheme of gray earnings, most of the income is hidden. Helen was just like her mother, even in an even worse version. But she was not going to give up and continued to dream of a prince, who will surely sooner or later solve all her financial problems. Her mother supported her eldest daughter in everything, adored her grandson. This is not surprising. Julia also gladly fiddled with the baby when she had time. But the girl did not understand how it was possible not to draw conclusions from what had happened. Wasn't it clear? The plan is not too good and often fails. It was time to choose another option. But no, Helen still hung out on dating sites, looking for bigger prey. I got in, Julia explained her strange behavior to her sister. Wow, cool. What, you're going to the city from us now? You're going away to study. Julia and her family also lived in the city, but in a very small, remote from the regional center. Gray 3-story houses, whole streets of old wooden barracks, a huge private sector. Julia's university was located there, and everyone called it that. Her mother, too, was happy to hear about her youngest daughter's enrollment. She had never hoped for such a thing. As it turned out, thought, let the little one, to show off, and when she realizes that nothing worked out, will go in the footsteps of her parents in the supermarket for the cash register. Well, and will think, finally, over the words of more experienced relatives. Realizes it is necessary to look for a rich and reliable man. And here's how it turned out. She did it. Good for you, daughter, Mom hugged Junior. I'll help you in any way I can. I'm sorry, I can't send you a lot of money, but at least a little for food, for housing, for being. Again, you need to dress nicely. In a big city, there's a better chance of meeting a decent man. Mom, you smiled at Julia again. She was touched by the fact that her mother supported and understood her, and even offered to help her. Julia knew. It's not easy for a mother to get that money, but she's willing to help her daughter while she's still a student. And that's priceless. Julia had a new life. She was given a room in the student dormitory, but not a separate one. The room had to be shared with 2 girls, but the roommates turned out to be very nice. They both studied at the Pedagogical Institute. Both, just like Julia herself, were focused on their studies and work. In general, the girls had a lot in common. With one of these neighbors, Valia, Julia even became friends. They kept their relationship even after they graduated from each of their universities and moved to rented apartments. Julia liked her studies. She was convinced in the first year that she had chosen the right direction. She found economics easy, the lectures seemed interesting, and term papers and tests were incredibly easy. Juliet even started earning money. It turned out that people are willing to pay a lot of money for essays and projects. Big it is by Julia's standards, of course. The girl had to work part-time and study a lot. She needs to get there as soon as possible. She has to realize she's with a loved one. At the hospital, Julia was told the terrible news. Mom's gone. She had just recently passed away. At the moment when Julia rushed to the clinic, everything happened in the intensive care unit. The doctor then said that there was no chance of a good outcome. The injuries were too serious, and Julia would not have been able to say goodbye to her mother anyway. She was in a coma, and still the girl fed herself for slowness, for not supporting her mother by the hand, while she was still not. Julia was signing some papers when she received a call from Helen. She had been informed by someone on the nursing staff, and now the older sister was in a state of near panic. It had been a difficult time, arranging the funeral, trying to bring the sister who was supposed to take care of her babies no matter what, and the gradual realization of the terrible fact that the nearest and dearest person in the world was now gone. Just know, that's all. The father did not show up at the funeral, although he could not have been unaware of what had happened. This man did not even call his daughters, did not try to understand whether they need his help. Probably thought they were adults. They were both over 18. So legally, the father was no longer their debtor. He paid child support until his daughters came of age, and there was nothing more to expect. It was then that Julia realized that she would not meet and communicate with this man, even when she reached the heights of her career. He didn't need Lenka and Mama, and they didn't need him either. No resentment. No, it's just that Julia suddenly realized that her father is a complete stranger to her. They may look alike in some ways, but he's a stranger, just a stranger. And that says it all. Helen, on the other hand, is a stranger, and she needs support. Helen cried nonstop for days. Julia didn't stop her. Let her cry. It would make it easier for her. While her sister was dealing with her grief, Julia helped her with her nephews. The little ones made her smile even in such a terrible situation. It was impossible to look indifferently at their funny games, to listen to their cute babbling. Nephews, like nothing else, showed Julia life goes on. Julia could not stay long with her sister. Winter session. Helen had already recovered a bit and even started monitoring dating sites again. Now she wanted even more to have a supportive adult by her side. Her mom was gone. In spite of everything, Julia passed the session with honors. That meant an increased scholarship. But this money would not even be enough to rent a room for a month. The dormitory became paid because it was necessary to eat, dress, and pay for transportation. Julia tried to combine her studies and work in the cafeteria. It turned out to be impossible at once a lot of passes and debts were accumulated. As a result, the girl did not even get admission to the next session. Expulsion loomed ahead. Teachers took into account the previous merits of the girl and went towards her. But she still failed. The only way out was the transfer to the correspondence department. Only here's the catch: budget places were all taken. The commercial option cost a fabulous amount of money for Julia. The rector offered a way out. One day he called Julia to himself and offered her the only, in his opinion, suitable option. "I know your situation. I wouldn't wish it on an enemy." So began the conversation a man who always reminded Julia of Carlson. Just as good-natured, full and short. "Student, you are diligent and promising. Such a one wants to help. That's why I'll close the session for you, no matter what. Let us draw the lines of the movie. And you take a sabbatical for a year. I'll help you get a job for family reasons. Raise money for school. You'll make it. You're a man of determination. And then when you stop, I'll help you with all the details. What do you think?" Julia thought about it. She didn't want to interrupt her studies. On the other hand, what other options did she have? The session is not passed, that's for sure. So, expulsion. And where to go? To go home, to her parents' apartment. So there's already a new suitor living there, a young and kind of nice guy, Stepan. Unlike the previous aluminum suitors, he's not a rich major. The guy works at a construction site, working from dawn to dusk, earning money. Seems to love Helen very much and has taken in all of her children. Maybe they'll actually have a family. Julia is completely unnecessary there right now, and she doesn't want to live with her sister. No, Julia loves her very much. She is the only person in the whole world who can be related to her. But still, Julia is used to peace, solitude, freedom. And there's a family with many children. You can't do that there. And after all, she doesn't want to leave Orkovsky. It's a big city. It's beautiful, spacious, interesting. Here there are more prospects for work and study. The urban-type settlement, where Julia spent her childhood, was associated with rage and hopeless longing. No, she didn't want to go back there at all. "You know, I'll probably take advantage of your offer." Julia smiled at the rector. "What a smart girl," asked the man. "You're good, you'll do well. Just don't forget to save for your studies. Be sure to come back to the university in a year. We will be waiting for you. Deal? It's a deal. Thank you very much for the offer." That same night, Julia started looking for a job. She urgently needed money, just to survive, to buy food, to pay for a roof over her head. The most effective motivation of all. It turned out that it was simply unrealistic to find anything close to the desired profession for a girl with an incomplete university degree. Julia was rejected everywhere. Employers did not even consider candidates without a diploma. The girl realized that she could show herself at the interview, but it did not even come to that. After a couple of days of fruitless searches, Julia realized it was time to part with the dream of working as an economist, or rather, to postpone it until better times. In the meantime, it is necessary to find something. When the bar was lowered a bit, things went better. Julia found a lot of vacancies: waitress, cleaner, salesman. But the wages were meager. No, it would be enough to live on, especially if you save money. But Julia had to save up for a year of schooling. With those salaries, it was impossible. And yet Julia needed a job. Immediately, she chose the path of a waitress in a bar in the city center. The arguments for this place were enough. First of all, there was extra pay for night shifts. Secondly, tips were very helpful, sometimes even very generous. And thirdly, the last job gave Julia the opportunity to write term papers and tests to order. And an extra penny in the piggy bank and brains are not idle. Total pluses. Work in the bar Julia even liked. The team is friendly, the bosses are loyal. The audience is decent. It was a rock bar whose owners cared about reputation. The atmosphere here was controlled. Undesirable elements were kicked out of security and never allowed in again. And another. Local band musicians and performers and visiting guests gathered here every night. In general, live music. And it was beautiful. Julia listened to the musicians' performances with pleasure, singing along, dancing. This in the bar was only welcomed. Going to work was like going to a holiday. In the bar, Julia finally understood the meaning of this popular phrase. Of course, with a waitress's salary, there are a lot of urgent things to do. Julia, in parallel, was looking for another job, more highly paid. But the girl knew even when she had to quit, she would come here to visit, just to be in this amazingly warm atmosphere. The rock bar and new friends helped Julia through her grief. Of course, the longing for her mother did not go away, but the girl was finally able to come back to life and believe that there are still a lot of good things ahead. It was in a rock bar that Julia met James. One day, the host introduced the guests to a new rock band, which appeared just a couple months ago. James was the bass player. But not only that, he was the one who had the idea to create this band. He was the one who wrote the songs and the music. Modest, always kept in the shadows, but continuously observing all the behavior of the band members, the reaction of the audience. James was the main man in the crew. Although on stage most of the attention was drawn to the lead singer, you could feel it. It was noticeable from the first glance. For some reason, Julia immediately singled him out and reached out to him. She did not recognize herself. Julia realized that she was not in a position to fall in love and have affairs. She was focused on her career, on her studies, on her recovery at the university. She couldn't be distracted by all this. She couldn't be distracted. And yet, James did not study and did not flirt with waitresses, did not talk to anyone first. He was serious, focused on his work. Perhaps that was what bought the girl off. James was very much like herself. James began to appear often in the bar, sometimes with a group to work, sometimes just in the company of buddies to relax. Of course, they soon got to know each other, but he still acted kind of aloof, didn't show open sympathy. Sometimes Julia caught his eye, though. But James would immediately turn away and talk to someone else. And Julia wanted him to pay attention to her, to compliment her, to give her signs of attention, as visitors often do. And then Julia would let him know that she was interested in him. One day in the company of James was a girl. This representative of the beautiful half of humanity came with him before, but they were just friends, girlfriends, other members of the group. This one was clearly something between us and James. They didn't kiss or hug, nothing like that, but sometimes they exchanged tender glances and smiled very warmly at each other. Once she laid her head right on his shoulder, and James, casual, cold, and even stern, stroked her hair in a natural and very gentle gesture, as if she were a kitten. A very unpleasant feeling was beating in Julia's chest from behind the collar. She recognized it immediately, of course. It was jealousy. With surprising scrupulousness, Julia began to pick out her rival's flaws. Too thin, not even pretty either. It's a nose, long hair, a little too liquid. Anyway, how could this madam be as good as Julia? For the first time in her life, Julia seemed to feel smug about her looks. Nature had endowed her, like Helen, with beauty. Julia had heard many compliments from others about her figure. She is tall, slender, long-legged. Her friends generally advised her to try herself in a modeling agency. Only this work was not to Julia's liking. Well, she did not know how to show herself, even somewhere that humiliating it considered it. And here, despite such impressive external data, the rival Julia was such a blue stocking. In general, there was nothing outstanding in James's companion, not even an eye to catch on. Nevertheless, he clearly had very tender feelings for her. Her presence made him happy. Julia watched James carefully and could tell that he loved his companion. It was painful, thanks to the girl that is. So to James, Julia had made up her mind. Decided to do something she had previously considered unacceptable to herself. Her shift was coming to an end, but per usual she stayed late to help a waitress friend serve tables on a Saturday night. There were a lot of patrons. Julia waited for an opportune moment. She even had a little drink beforehand for courage, to feel more confident and relaxed. James stood up and headed for the exit. Someone called him. The music was blaring in the bar. It was impossible to talk on the phone in such an environment. Everyone went outside, to the porch of the bar or to the smoking room. James chose the street. Julia followed him like a shadow, now or never. The obnoxious girl who had been sitting next to James all evening stayed at the table. She chatted merrily with his buddies. You could see that they had all known each other for a long time. Probably a long and serious relationship. And yet still Julia will try otherwise. Otherwise, she'll regret later that she didn't even try. James stepped out onto the porch. He paced the square in front of the bar, patiently explaining something to someone. Julia watched him through the large window on the door. James was not smiling, not joking. Did he see the conversation was serious or unpleasant? It didn't matter. Julia would still approach him as soon as she did. James pressed reset and was about to go back to the bar, but Julia came out to meet him. Luckily, they were alone on the porch at that moment. Hi, Julia smiled at him. James looked at her with interest. We've said hello, and I think we already have. Julia nodded at me. I need to talk to you. James immediately stopped, tuned into the conversation. All his appearance showed that he was ready to listen to his interlocutor. He could have brushed her off or shown irritation or displeasure. But James looked at her with his dark and intelligent eyes and waited. I like you, and I've liked you for a long time. Julia decided to get right to the point. I don't know how to explain it. I'm magnetically attracted to you. It's never happened to me before. Aya, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this. Julia lowered her eyes. There, she'd said it. What's next? James was probably just now finding the words to stitch her down as politely as possible. He probably was. Julia suddenly felt unbearably ashamed of her action. Why had she reached out to him? How could she look him in the eye after all this? James comes to the bar a lot. And then Julia felt his hands on her shoulders. A gentle touch, as if she were some incredibly fragile vessel. Julia, the name itself, as it escaped James's lips, sounded like beautiful music to the girl. Julia, I couldn't even imagine such a thing. James looked at her and smiled. He so rarely smiled. His eyes. The girl could see it clearly. They shone with happiness. Sincere, genuine. What's going on? Is he happy for her confession? Instead of words, James kissed Julia. The girl felt dizzy from it all. He was hugging her. More precisely, even held, because the girl's legs were literally under the painting kissed. Then he stroked her back and head, gently pressed her against him. I've been watching you for a long time too, and I'm attracted to you in the same way. Then why? I didn't even notice it once. I thought you didn't care. I didn't want to embarrass you. I don't. Anyway, I'm older. Older for you. I thought you were attracted to other guys, brutal, successful. With your looks, anything's possible. You're beautiful. You're unreal. You even inspired my song. Didn't realize I'm an Olympic princess. Is that about you? No, Julia confessed. It's a very beautiful song. I love it. I didn't even realize it came from you. Oh yeah, that's right. And that girl who came with you. Are you two together? We are. James couldn't help but chuckle. Together. Ever since my parents brought me back from the hospital with a pink bow and told me that Svetka was my sister. So she's your sister. Julia laughed out loud. I thought so. That's why I decided to have this conversation today. Sister, sister. James held Julia tighter to him and breathed in the scent of her hair, just passing through town. She's been married a long time, living far away with her husband. She misses the brotherhood of her troublemaking brother. Julia and James started dating. Turns out he's been sympathizing with the pretty waitress all this time. Why didn't he make any moves on her? I was going to. But later, when he's a little more cash flush. He had a clear attitude in his head. Girl, I'm interested in losers. So far, there was too much to do with the band, organizing performances, and so on. But the guys were already starting to earn money from their songs. The prospects were looking good. And oddly enough for a rock musician, was James shy around girls? No, he had a lot of friends with whom you can chat, laugh together. But Julia, she evoked in him a very special feeling, and that made James, used to performing in front of hundreds of people, cringe. But Julia made the first step, thus shattering all of James' doubts. And now they're together. James himself suggested moving in together. They decided to choose Julia's apartment. Convenient location, adequate cost, cozy room. So it was James who moved in with her. But he immediately took upon himself the payment of rent and minor repairs, which every dwelling needs from time to time. And it also turned out that James is an excellent cook. Julia's culinary talents just pales in front of his skill. James, as befits a creative person, created real masterpieces. Whether in the recording studio or in the kitchen, he was gentle, sensitive, and attentive, fully immersed in his work, but not forgetting about his beloved. They talked a lot, often went for walks. Sometimes they discussed the next song together. It happened that Julia would suggest to her beloved the necessary phrase or words. He happily grasped the idea, and then the girl felt proud of herself. Well, how? Participated in the creation of a hit? Julia completely dissolved in her feelings and new sensations. Before meeting James, she did not know what it is love for a man. She had no time for that. First studying hard, then trying to survive. It turned out to be so pleasant to be near a man who embraces you, interested in your mood and well-being, looks at you with admiring eyes, as at some princess, and melt from the touch of warm, strong hands. Knowing that he, this tall man with black eyes, would do anything for you, Helen didn't approve of her sister's choice. As always, she had her own yardstick. He's poor, he doesn't even have his own apartment. Again, no steady job, no business. He's a musician, he's got his own rock band. So what? Who needs them anyway? There's a lot of these one-day bands out there. We don't know if they'll succeed. I think you got the wrong guy. With your looks, you shouldn't do that. It's okay with me. I have 3 kids. Who needs me? So I'm content with what fate gives me. I don't complain. But you? Julia didn't expect her sister to understand. They were always too different. But Julia didn't need understanding. She was happy, she was loved. She had someone close to her. Yeah, he was going through a rough patch. But James tried, went to his goal, worked hard, looked for the right contacts, planned something. Julia supported him in all his endeavors, and he appreciated her devotion. Many times he said that he was grateful to fate for such a gift, for her. One day James undertook a rather risky endeavor, inviting a famous rock band to Orkovsky. It was planned that his band would perform as a warm-up act for the famous musicians. This event was to increase the popularity of the band James. Well, and in general, the organization of such concerts is a way to earn good money. But something went wrong. Not as many people came to the concert as planned. There was a big rock festival in a neighboring state. James didn't take that into account. Or rather, he found out about the festival too late, when everything was already in full swing. In general, James went into a big disadvantage: payment of musicians' fees, rent of the hall and equipment, tickets for the rock band, promotional activities. All this was paid off only half of the money from ticket sales. The concert itself was great, but James had huge debts that had to be closed as soon as possible. But with what? It was hard for Julia to look at her lover. During this period, he looked confused, anxious. I wanted to help him at least something. But how? Where did Julia get the money from? James took out a loan, but it was just a drop in the ocean. His friends helped him, the situation improved, but the debt was still quite substantial. And then, Then Julia offered to help. She had savings, money she was saving for her studies. Not much, of course, but still. In addition, the girl did what she had been against for a long time. She took out a consumer loan. These funds were quite enough to close the debt. From where? Surprised James when Julia handed him several packs of new crispy bills. Well, just out of the blue, my debt was paid off, plus the insurance. Finally paid off the cell phone case money. The girl lied. She knew. If she told James the truth, he'd never take her money. And so it wasn't like it was the last one that came in by accident. Thank you. James hugged Julia tightly. I'll pay you back. You'll see we'll be famous soon, and I'll pay it all back. James paid the debt and continued to develop the band. Julia slowly paid off the loan. It was no longer possible to save for school, and in general, the salary suddenly became much smaller. The bar had fallen on hard times. It was good that James bought groceries and paid the rent. That is, he took the main part of the expenses on himself. James' income came from a few corporate gigs and the occasional part-time job. Unstable earnings, but still does not dry up, and the stream is empty and then thick. Julia, not caring about the financial side of their relationship. She enjoyed James' attention, bathed in his love and care, and generously gave him tenderness, love, support. Julia tried not to think about the future, but not to recover in the university this year will do it next year. Nothing to worry about. She still had time. The most important thing is that he, James, is there for her. Julia didn't know she was capable of such feelings. And then James disappeared. No, he didn't run away from Julia. Nothing bad happened to him. It started out as a business trip. You can imagine, James grabbed Julia by the shoulder and even shook her a little. His eyes burned like two bright spotlights. You can imagine, I was invited to Germany to write music for a band. They found me on the internet, and they liked it. And now I'm invited. Julia couldn't believe her ears. She knew the band James was talking about. They were very popular musicians, touring all over the world. And they'd noticed James. They're offering him a partnership. Unbelievable. I'm going to have to go away for a while, James continued. Do you realize what that means? Julia nodded. She understood the money, the fame, the dizzying opportunities for James to grow and develop as a musician. Useful acquaintances and connections. James would get things he'd never dreamed of, but it looks like they're going to have to part ways indefinitely. After all, James clearly said I have to leave me, not us. The packing started. James had a lot of things to sort out. First of all, finding a replacement. Someone has to play in his band in his place. Temporarily. While he was away, of course. Secondly, James had to apply for a passport and visa. Thirdly, packing. In all the hustle and bustle, he seemed to have forgotten all about Julia. James was too enthusiastic about the upcoming changes and prospects. The girl looked at him and realized he would forget about her. Forget about her. In another country, muted by new impressions, excited by work and success. Perhaps James would even find someone there. But James, he hugged her so tenderly in the evenings, so sincerely assured her that he would miss her. Time will pass quickly, and then there's the video link. We'll be in constant contact with each other. At least I'll make some money, finally pay you back in a decent way. I know how much you need that money. Maybe we can even buy an apartment. My band will get bigger. I'll gain invaluable experience. I'll know how to do things. Everything's gonna be fine. James truly believed that. Julia saw it. He wasn't lying, he wasn't bullshitting. But something told the girl that everything would change as soon as her beloved was abroad. It's just that James himself doesn't realize it yet. That's how it turned out in the end. At first, James called every day, as promised, telling her how to settle in at the new place. Everything thrilled him, the experience overwhelmed him. And then he suddenly dropped off the radar. He just disappeared. He didn't call or answer Julia's calls. Long rings steadily ended with the message that the subscriber, apparently busy and therefore cannot answer. Julia was alarmed at first. I thought that something had happened to him, something terrible, irreparable. But soon she saw a fresh performance of that band on the music channel. James was with them. He was very different, mature, and even more serious than usual. I mean, there was nothing wrong with him. It's just that he'd apparently decided to start a new life and cut off all his old ties, including forgetting about her. And Julia? At first, the girl still hoped, waited for him to call, to explain everything. But James disappeared completely out of her life. Julia made it a habit to watch the music channel every day. Every once in a while, she'd see James. He was never the center of attention, but he still got in the camera lens sometimes. And quite often the girl next to him was the same girl, either a makeup artist or the band's costumer. Beautiful, bright. Apparently, there was something between her and James. Julia was desperately jealous of James, both of this girl and of her lover's other potential husbands. She was hurt like she had never been hurt before, and also hurt and scared. Scared of being alone again without the support and warmth of a loved one. An unpleasant mixture of feelings and emotions. And there were other problems, more pressing. Moneylessness. Julia could barely make ends meet. She had a tiny salary and a loan. Eventually, the bar went bankrupt. The new owners bought it and set up Julia's Coca Lounge. She had to quit, like all the other employees. Another blow. Julia had special memories and feelings connected with this place. And now there was no cozy bar where you could always enjoy live music, where there was a friendly, warm atmosphere. James would understand, support her. Everything was easier and more pleasant with him in general. But he was hundreds of kilometers away from her and seemed to have forgotten all about her. James had no idea how desperate she was. He never found out about the loan. He thought Julia had helped him with the extra money she'd suddenly received. And of course, he has no idea she's been fired. And if he did, what would he care about her now? Julia had no time to go over the offenses and think about how it would be if she desperately needed a job, and preferably in a decently paid. And so the girl tirelessly scored the ads. Wanted to find something that would help to get out of the financial hole. Well, at least the landlord agreed to wait with payment. But he's got a lot of patience too. Julia will be asked to leave. This ad caught Julia's attention with the amount of money that was offered for the services. Not a bad figure. It could solve many of the girl's problems. But the job itself seemed too unfamiliar to Julia. A nurse was needed for a little girl. The sort of unhealthy diagnosis didn't agree, but the person who gave the ad made it clear the child needed round-the-clock supervision and care, including taking medication by the hour, accompanying her to procedures, and so on. Julia wondered. She had experience in caring for babies. Thanks, Helen, her conclusion. The girl even enjoyed fiddling with her nephews. She knew how to get along with small children, knew how to feed them, change their clothes, keep them occupied. But here we were talking about a sick child, a seriously ill one by the looks of it. Could she do it? At least it was worth a try. Julia called the given number. She was answered by a pleasant male voice. The man asked her several questions: age, occupation, education, experience with small children, and she was invited for an interview. Julia was nervous the day before. She wanted the job. Julia needed it like air. It was a chance to get out of a financial hole, to stay afloat. Where else to find such a salary? That's why the girl was worried about what if she was not taken. What then again to look for a place waitress? Labor for pennies. Cab brought Julia to the country cottage village. Elite neighborhood, high, beautiful houses surrounded by fences. At the gate, the girl met a woman, an au pair. As Julia found out later, and in fact a person who had everything on her plate. Cleaning, cooking, laundry. Because her employer, William, was always too busy. Businessmen in general have very little free time. William met the job applicants in the living room. He was a man in his 40s with intelligent, piercing blue eyes. Perfectly styled hair with a slight square. An athletic figure. Yes, this man clearly paid attention to health and appearance. Juliet even cracked up at first. How to start a conversation with someone like this? To herself next to him, she suddenly seemed insignificant. Good morning. Warm. William smiled, and Julia's embarrassment vanished. The man's smile was open, and the kind William seemed at once like a man of his own. Hello. Julia smiled back. I'm here through an ad for you. It's very good. I'll tell you right away. I need a nurse for my daughter Sophia. She is in a very serious condition now, so it's not for everyone. She's being monitored by the paramedics. They're here every day. I could hire a nurse for Sophia, but how can I tell you? There's already a lot of pain in her life, a lot of people in white coats. I wish there was someone else there for her. You know, a young girl like you, cheerful, who knows a lot of songs and fairy tales, who can cheer up a child, inspire him, come up with some interesting activity, in general, to brighten up her leisure time. Why? What's wrong with your girl? Julia just couldn't help but ask that question. Who would know? William lowered his eyes. His face grew darker in an instant, becoming anxious and tense. Sophia, it's been examined everywhere. No one could understand anything. It's like her body is destroying itself. No signs of autoimmune aggression. She's been getting tests all the time. They do, but she's fading and nothing helps her. Poor baby, Julia exclaimed. The doctors are doing what they can. I have the means, as you can see. But they are not all powerful, unfortunately. Anyway, Sophia needs more than just a nanny. We have Adriana, our favorite au pair. She will feed her, give her medications on time, and we don't just need a caregiver either. Sophia is supervised by nurses. They do all the necessary procedures. Sophia is needed soon. A friend, a person who can bring her positive emotions. The doctors say it's very important in her condition. And looking at you, it seems to me that you're young, beautiful, cheerful, and you have a kind look in your eye. You can empathize. That's good. Julia nodded. She wanted to see Sophia as soon as possible. If she needed positive emotions, she would provide them. Julia was sure to cheer up a girl who had such a serious illness. To brighten up the gray, everyday life of the little patient, we'll find a way to make her life more pleasant. If you're ready to get to work right now, William continued, let's start a trial period. Let's say 3 days, and then Sophia will decide. Of course, you will be paid for your time anyway. But do you agree? Yes, nodded Julia. Good, William asked. Then Adriana will introduce you to Sophia. And I'm off. Business. As the door shut behind William, Adriana, a middle-aged woman with a surprisingly soft and cozy look, turned to Julia with a question. I used to talk to babies. Do you know what little kids are like? I have nephews, Julia nodded. Is that a good thing? Adriana shook her head. But Sophia is ours. She's an unusual child. I've already realized that. I guess Sophia hardly ever gets out of bed. She gets tired quickly. It's hard to get her interested in anything, but you have to. Sophia needs to be distracted from her pain, from her agony. And she needs to walk at least an hour a day. That's what the doctor said. I get it. Well, now let's go meet her. Julia followed Adriana up to the second floor and entered the nursery. It was a spacious princess room. A huge window let in a lot of daylight. Along the walls were racks of expensive toys and books. Right in the center of the room was a mini playground. There was a slide, swings, and even a trampoline. A little farther away was a ball pool, and closer to the door was a bed. What kind of bed was it? A big, round one. Julia looked around curiously. She had never seen a room like this before. Was it all for one child? In the midst of the splendor, Julia did not immediately notice the little mistress of the room. The girl was lying in bed surrounded by large stuffed toys. There was a cat baton, a fluffy white bear, a bright green crocodile with flowers all over his body, and a skinny pale 7-year-old girl, completely transparent and almost merged from the unhealthy color of her skin with the white bed linen. Huge blue eyes, like her father's, looked at the entrance with curiosity. Sophia raised herself up on her elbows, though it cost her great effort, and turned to Adriana. Who's that with you? The new rehabilitator. The difficult word came out of the little girl's mouth easily and habitually, and it felt unnatural. No, Bunny, this is your new friend. Her name is Julia. Will you play dolls together? Sophia got a little excited. Would you like to? I smiled at Julia. The girl evoked sympathy and pity. I like to play dolls very much. That's good. Adriana's not available. Can't Daddy play at all? Adults have a lot to do, Julia shrugged. That's why they can be boring sometimes, Sophia suggested. And the conspirators smiled. Boring, agreed Julia. Sophia laughed quietly. Well, I can see you're going to be fine. Adriana looked genuinely happy. Did you have fun here? I'm going to make dinner. Oh, and Sophia, you remember the nurse is coming to see you today, right? I remember, the girl frowned. Again, IVs. But where to go? Sweet Adriana kissed the top of the girl's head and left the room. Julia was left alone with Sophia. Well, shall we play? The girl turned to her ward with a smile. You have so many beautiful toys here. I can't keep my eyes open. You'd better read to me, the girl asked. It seemed that the short conversation had taken the last of her strength. Sophia sank down on the pillows, pulled the blanket over her skinny body, although the room was warm. Good, Julia agreed. She was surprised and horrified by the weakness of this child of 7. They are also Azers, such as Larry, Julia's older nephew. He is just the same age as Sophia. But he can't even sit still for 5 minutes. He's always getting into things, figuring things out. If the boy was suddenly in this room, he would immediately start jumping on the trampoline or going down the slide. Helen calls him the perpetual motion machine and Molly. Christina and Christina are not lagging behind her brother, although they are younger. Sophia is lying there, poor thing. What do you want to read about princesses? There's a book on the windowsill. Vera started to read it to me, but she doesn't have time to read it. It was a heavy, beautiful book with bright pictures. But the story itself, it seemed Julia some kind of silly, boring, predictable, and formulaic. She herself as a child did not like such stories at all. And let's make up our own story about these princesses. As Julia, I expected tired eyes, Sophia flashed interest. How to do it, she clarified. Very simple. I start, you continue. Sophia was engrossed in the lesson. She was inspired to invent adventures for the princess. She would ride in her racing car. Then the heroine would be kidnapped by a dragon and then rescued by the prince. The girl's imagination was running wild, which seemed to surprise Sophia herself. Then Adriana entered the room. Seeing that Julia and Sophia were getting along, she was pleased. The woman brought a lunch of mashed soup and stewed vegetables. Sophia grumbled. I don't want it, she said. I don't want to eat at all. I don't want any of this. Adriana looked at Julia. The woman was clearly waiting for her help. Let me feed you. Julia turned to Sophia. Each spoonful. Another princess adventure. I'll make them up as I go along. Can you imagine the stories I'll have to tell you? What do you think will finish your food or my fantasy first? It worked. The food ended faster than Julia's fantasy, but Sophia demanded more story. Adriana splayed out her hands in surprise, smiled, and walked out. Soon a nurse, Sophia, entered the nursery. Immediately on the gloomy one. She was almost asleep by now. Lunch and the story had tired her out. But it was time for treatments. IVs. Hopelessly asked the girl to the nurse. She nodded sympathetically. I'll do it quickly. Don't worry, it won't hurt. You sleep later, and we'll have tea. Adriana pulled Julia by the sleeve. Aren't you needed here now? The au pair led Julia into the spacious kitchen, smoking cups of coffee and a flavorful cake that looked like it had just come out of the oven were waiting on the table. You, Sophia, and I see you're getting along. The woman smiled, looking warmly at Julia. That's good. Sophia had kicked out the previous nanny, but he's taken to you right away. I've already called William and told him all about it. He's very pleased and excited. He told me to take good care of you. I'm glad too. Julia smiled. Sophia is just a pity. My nephews are so noisy, so cheerful. She is lying on the bed. She can't even play. She has nothing to play with. It's scary. That's what the doctors say. There's a chance. No prognosis. Adriana shook her head. They can't even diagnose anything. They just treat the symptoms, that's all. Sophia will be better now after the drip. Take her for a walk after her afternoon nap for a while. William, the girl's father. I get that. Where's her mom? On a business trip. She has a demanding job too, that's why she can't babysit. I wish, Adriana sighed. Is Betty ours? She's gone. It was a difficult labor. The doctors tried to save the baby and didn't notice that the mother needed help. And she herself, Helen, didn't complain to them about anything. She was worried about the baby. But that's how it turned out. The day after the birth, Betty had a high fever. Checkup, ICU, this and that. Her heart stopped. Poor thing had some kind of internal bleeding. It's a rare case. And then there was Sophia in the NICU. She was born prematurely. It was a tough time. That's a shame. That's a shame, Adriana agreed. Let me tell you the whole story. Looks like you're gonna be here for a while. So you should know. William grew up in a well-to-do, close-knit family. A loving mom and dad, caring, attentive grandparents, a room of his own. Trips to the seaside every summer, birthdays, friends. William had a happy childhood, an equally happy youth. He graduated from high school with a gold medal. Thanks in large part to parents who cared about their son's education. If they saw gaps, they immediately hired William the best tutors. And foreign languages, and the boy studied in foreign camps and rest, and education at once. Vouchers to such places were not cheap, and it was not easy to get them. But what can't you do for the sake of your favorite son, especially if he is so desirable and long-awaited? William had rather old parents. They did not get a child for many years. The couple resigned, was with such a fate. But then, when there was no hope left, life suddenly threw a surprise gave the couple an heir. Needless to say, all of his mother's and father's attention from then on belonged undividedly to William. William was never shy of his parents. Yes, he saw his mother and father much older than the relatives of his classmates. But the boy, on the contrary, was proud of them, because William's father was a well-known businessman in the city, and his mother was the head doctor of the regional hospital. Everyone knew them, everyone respected them. It never occurred to William to be ashamed of his family. William grew up. His parents were rapidly becoming obsolete, giving up. When the guy was in his third year of university, his father died. Stroke, intensive care, coma, and all. William then, for the first time, felt like an adult. You bet, because he, a student, had to get into the affairs of the company, which his parents left the guy by inheritance. It was William, a teenager, who was interested in his father's business. He knew a lot, even had the right to sign. And yet still, at first, he entrusted most of the processes to the manager of the board, a longtime friend of his departed parent. Because William needed to study and support his mother, who had given up a lot after the death of her spouse. 3 years passed. William had just gotten his degree, just taken over his father's company, just starting to gain momentum. And then there's another blow. Mom this time. The kid was all alone. William felt miserable and lonely in his parents' big house. At least Adriana, the au pair and almost a member of the family, was there. She had known William as a baby and treated him as her son. The woman had no children of her own. She gave all her care to the young man, who had lost both his parents one after the other. It was hard on him. Adriana shook her head. Just a boy, but also. Work had pulled him through then. He had to decide something, to go somewhere, to hold meetings, to make contracts, and so on. That's what saved him back then. Time passed. William went from a young, inexperienced guy to a smart guy. A grip on the man, a talented businessman. Adriana rejoiced, looking at her ward. He grew older, stronger, more confident. The au pair wanted William to find a good wife, marry her, and become a father. Then her heart would be at peace. Adriana was calm. Only he had no one in particular. Adriana said, "No, there were some girls hanging around William. He's a good-looking guy, wealthy. They're always on the prowl. But I met with one of them, and I didn't see anything wrong with the other. I didn't like them as counselors. And I didn't like them either. It seemed like they only wanted money from him. He's got a tail on his head." And then Betty showed up. William met Betty literally on the street. She was walking down the sidewalk in a hurry. Turns out she was going to a job interview at William's firm. Betty had recently been downsized. The factory where she had worked for several years, after the institute as an accountant, had suddenly closed. So Betty was looking for a new position, and William went out for a walk to clear his head. He even had a goal to buy donuts at the bakery around the corner. And that's when fate knocked the young people head-on, literally. Helen jumped out of the corner too quickly and ran into the unsuspecting William. It was like something out of a romantic music video. The bag slipped off Betty's shoulder and the contents scattered on the pavement. William and Betty rushed to pick it up. Did the girl harbor words of apology? William assured her it was okay and admired the girl's beautiful gray eyes. It was love at first sight. When the young people sorted out the bag and the things that had spilled out of it, they rose synchronously and smiled at each other. Well, William, as a man, made the first step, learned the name of the beautiful stranger, and then introduced himself. They walked leisurely and talked and got acquainted. When William found out that Betty was rushing to his office, he asked and immediately realized that this beautiful girl was his destiny. And it was not by chance that they met in such an interesting way. Rather than seeing each other for the first time in the office, it was more romantic, more interesting, more enjoyable. All in all, a real romance was brewing. Adriana had never seen William so happy. Betty turned out to be intelligent, understanding, kind. She and Adriana, and importantly, quickly found a common language. Sweet, sweet girl. And for what? And only such a fate. Sadly shook her head Adriana. A couple of years after their acquaintance, William and Betty got married. It was a wonderful couple, harmonious, happy. There was love, mutual understanding, and respect between the couple. I am sure that her heart rejoiced when she saw them together, her beloved. After all, Vanya, his wonderful, beautiful wife. Here with children, both decided not to hurry. Adriana continued the story. It was their common decision, as if they felt something. They traveled, worked, met with friends. And I, the fool, all in the old man's way. I advised them not to wait too long. I wanted to nurse their baby. But William and Betty lived on their own for 5 years after they were married. Were they happy together? No, they wanted kids, but not right away later while they were happy with everything. And then the news of Betty's pregnancy. It was an unplanned event, but the whole household welcomed it with joy. Well, then it was time, Betty summarized. The baby had decided he'd had enough of waiting. Thank God. Adriana threw up her hands. I think you're having a boy. You're very beautiful, Betty. Girls take away their mother's beauty during pregnancy. But the au pair was wrong. The ultrasound confirmed that Betty was expecting a girl. A big, strong one. They showed me a picture of her. They take pictures of a baby in the womb now. And when I looked at it, it looked just like Betty. That's how our Sophia was born, just like her mommy. Sophia. It was Betty who chose the name for her daughter. William and Adriana didn't mind. They both liked it very much. The pregnancy didn't go too easily. At first, Betty was suffering from toxicosis. Then it seemed to subside, but it was replaced by other problems such as high blood pressure and swelling. The child was developing well, but the mother was suffering, melting before her eyes, refusing to eat, lying down a lot. The usually energetic Betty lacked the strength even to go downstairs. Adriana carried her food directly to her bedroom. The woman felt sorry for Betty, helped her in any way she could, and assured her that everything would go away after her daughter was born. Children aren't easy for women, Adriana sighed. Pregnancy had taken its toll on Betty. Who's to say? Julia shrugged, remembering her sister. Both of them had gotten babies relatively easily. Anyway, Betty went into labor much earlier than she should have. The whole pregnancy was threatened, so fortunately, the mother-to-be was in the hospital under the supervision of doctors at that moment. They tried to stop the process, but failed. Sophia was born prematurely. Weak, she did not scream. She was not placed on Alina's chest, not even shown to her. When it comes to newborns who need to stay in the womb for at least 3 more months, things are different. Sophia was immediately sent to the intensive care unit. The fight for her life began, and Betty and Lena seemed to be fine at first. Well, tired, of course, after childbirth. Well, anxious. She couldn't find a place for her daughter. It's all understandable, all explainable, and natural. The doctors examined the woman in labor, found no abnormalities, and sent her to the ward. Afterwards, serious symptoms appeared, but it was too late. William and I were all worried about the girl. Adriana almost cried. It was obvious that even now, 7 years later, it was hard for her to remember it all. They thought that the little girl would not survive. She was born too early. She was very weak. And then, when William received a call from the hospital in the morning and was told that his wife had died of internal bleeding, he could not believe his ears. It seemed to him that it was Sophia. His mind refused to accept what he was hearing. But no, Sophia had made it. Stronger was the girl. Betty, on the other hand, was not. William, then the gray one, walked around, didn't sleep or eat for months. I thought he was going to die too, but he went away. I had to work. I had to pull Sotnikova through. To be perfectly honest, he didn't treat his daughter well at first. Blamed her for what happened to Lena. He knew it was wrong, but he couldn't help it. He was angry with her, that's all. Sophia was discharged home. They hired a nanny for her. Someone had to look after the baby. Adriana was too old for that, but she enjoyed playing. Sophia took her around the yard in her stroller and talked to her a lot. And she was the only one who gave the newborn the love she needed. My father was not capable of that at that time. She is like a granddaughter to me, smiled the au pair. I accepted her immediately. But William, he long shunned the child, bought for her everything necessary, and sometimes went for a walk with her. And that was if I made him. He didn't take the initiative himself. And then one day Sophia got sick. The temperature was high. Nothing helped. She was throwing up. It was the flu. It plagued a lot of people back then. And the little ones took it especially hard. But anyway, Sophia went to the hospital again. The doctors didn't give any prognosis. And that's when William came to his senses, gave up everything. He sat by his daughter's bedside singing songs and singing, telling poems, rocking her in his arms, and Sophia. It was as if she felt her father's care. She was on the mend immediately. Our little girl was discharged, and William became a real father, loving and caring. Life went on as usual. William worked a lot, but always found time to spend with his daughter. Sophia grew up, pleased her father and Adriana with her excellent health and rare intelligence, and everything seemed to be fine. But Adriana was worried that William was all alone. It seemed to her that there would be no happiness for him until he met a woman. Only now it was a very difficult task. Chosen by William, she had to love and accept Sophia. Otherwise, a union was out of the question. Well, God heard my prayers, Adriana smiled. And William had Lucy, the beautiful Lucy. I can't take my eyes off her. She's smart too. She's got a baby herself, a little girl a little younger than Sophia. It's a great family. Lucy got a job with William, and it all started at a corporate party. So, it's the usual story. Lucy was very good to Sophia. She often took her and her youngest daughter somewhere to an amusement park or to the movies. Sophia loved both Lucy and her little half-sister Nancy. She was truly happy. William and Lucy got married and started living together. Then Sophia started having these symptoms. First dizziness, then nausea, weakness, lack of appetite. Examination in the best clinics, trips to doctors abroad, consultations with famous professors, all this did not give any result. Doctors could not diagnose the girl was melting before their eyes. The first year, she was still on her feet. Adriana almost cried again. It was obvious that her heart was truly hurting for the little girl. After New Year's Eve, she had gotten very ill, and now she was so afraid for her. And it is not clear what kind of illness attacked our little girl. Lucy and her daughter temporarily moved into her own apartment. Just Nancy went to the garden to carry infections from there. And for Sophia, all this was extremely dangerous. So Lucy and William made that decision. And it comes from Lucy a lot, every day almost. She's good, Sophia is fair. They bring her goodies. They bring Nancy too, sometimes, when she's not sick. When she started kindergarten, it started. Sick day after sick day. So they have a wife with one child separately, and a husband with their eldest daughter separately. That's the family. Well, what can I do? That's the situation. It's a strange situation, Julia said. She was shocked by the story of William and Sophia. You could make a TV series. Well, that's just the way it is. The old woman waved her hands. Sophia, I can see that you get along, and that's good. Everything will be more pleasant with you. The days went by. Julia now lived in the room next to Sophia's nursery, but the girl often asked the nanny to stay overnight in her bedroom. Sophia had a very comfortable sofa there. Julia lay down on it. They talked before going to bed, holding hands. Julia saw Sophia. It was very important. The girl clearly lacked attention, even though there were many adults around her. William was a very caring and anxious father and a pleasant person to be around. They often had conversations about Sophia. The man always listened attentively to Julia, did not interrupt or argue, and asked the right questions. Julia also got to know Lucy. Adriana was right. Indeed, she was a very beautiful woman. Chiseled cheekbones, beautifully curved lips, the grace of a panther, a real queen. But when Lucy interacted with Sophia, when she was adjusting the blanket on the girl, she smiled and stroked the little girl's head. Julia couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was faking it. It was evident in seemingly insignificant details. The cold glint of her eyes, the squeamish movement of her lips, something elusive and very unpleasant. One day Julia had a strange dream. The girl found herself in some room stripped wallpaper, creaking, twigs, floors. She sat on a stool by a dark window through which nothing was visible and realized that she was asleep. She wanted to wake up, but for some reason she couldn't. And then Julia did not even realize where she had come from. Betty appeared in front of her as if out of thin air. Julia recognized her because she had seen Sophia's mother in pictures. Betty smiled sadly and looked at Julia with a warm and very soft gaze. "Watch her," she said in a quiet, illogical voice. "Watch out for Lucy. She's trouble. She's dangerous." Betty vanished into thin air, and Julia had so many questions she wanted to ask her. How to keep an eye on her on what? What is she dangerous? Julia woke up in a cold sweat. Or rather, as if she'd flown into her body, fallen into it. It felt strange. Betty's words were still echoing in her head. No, Julia didn't believe in the supernatural. But the dream, which was little more than a dream, was more like a journey through time and worlds. The strange dream wouldn't let go. The next day Lucy was gone, and Julia waited for her. She knew for a fact that this woman was involved in something bad. Lucy is somehow hurting this family and doesn't like Sophia. She doesn't sympathize with the girl. She just pretends to care. And how come the others don't notice this? Even the experienced, long-lived Adriana. Lucy showed up the next day, beautiful as always, brightly made up, languid. First thing she did was go up to Sophia to say hello. Then she went down to the kitchen. "Sophia is thirsty," Lucy said, looking at Adriana. "Let me make her some cocoa. Come on, I fussed, the au pair." "No, I can manage. I feel like it. I want to do something for her. You're so thoughtful." Julia was silent. She was watching Lucy like Betty had asked her to in the dream. For some reason, it felt like this was the big moment. It was as if Betty was there, telling her to be vigilant. Adriana was tending to the dough. Julia pretended to look out the window, but she was watching Lucy. And then there was Tanya. The woman deftly pulled a small vial out of her sleeve, dripped a few drops from there into the milk, and immediately hid the bottle back. Only a couple seconds, a few deft movements, but Julia saw everything. "The drink for the princess is ready." Lucy smiled. "Julia, give me her favorite cup, please." Julia obeyed. She silently watched as Lucy poured what felt like a mug's Sophia glasses, with the image of characters of the girl's favorite cartoon. And I realized Sophia shouldn't drink it. She shouldn't. She must act. Julia pretended to slip. She bumped into Lucy, who dropped the cup from her hands. The glass fell and shattered. What spilled out onto the floor? "I'm sorry, I'm so clumsy." Julia fussed, grabbed a rag, started wiping, undoing the puddle, picking up the shards. "It's okay, I'll do more." In the voice of Lucy sounded poorly concealed irritation. Julia could not do it a second time. It would arouse suspicion. So she had to accept the fact that Sophia would get the cocoa from her stepmother's hands. While Lucy and Adriana were at Sophia's place, Julia squeezed the rag she used to wipe the cocoa into an empty tomato paste jar. She was going to take the liquid to be analyzed today. Anne needed to know exactly what Lucy put in the cocoa. Maybe it was just vitamins. Then there was no point in panicking. But something told the girl it wasn't. She had to wait 2 days for the test results. When Julia saw the statement, she was horrified. The drink contained a deadly poison, causing symptoms similar to those of Sophia. So the girl's weakness was due to her stepmother systematically poisoning her. Just like in a fairy tale, Julia didn't know who to turn to with her news. Adriana, what can she do? William, he wouldn't believe her. What to do? Lucy can't be allowed near the girl anymore. She wants to send her to the grave, and she's almost succeeded. And yet Julia has the courage to talk to William. She told him everything about her terrible dream, about the cocoa, and about the examination. Julia was afraid that he would yell at her, call her out, kick her out, or what's more, accuse her of wanting to hurt his daughter. You know, William said, looking at Julia, I would. I'd probably fire you immediately after saying that. It's very strange, you have to admit. But just yesterday, I had an unusual dream too. Betty, she asked me to trust you just to trust you, nothing more. Why don't you just keep this to yourself and take a vacation? I need to sort this out. Adriana will call you when you can go back to work. Julia spent those few days on pins and needles. She didn't know what was going on at William's house, and she was worried about Sophia, who had already become attached to her. But William had said to wait for the call, so she would wait. Adriana called Julia when she saw her name on the screen. Worried about what she would be told, how did it go? Come on over. All Adriana could do was extort. We're in the middle of something. Come over soon. Sophia misses you. Very much. Julia didn't have to beg long. Half an hour later, she was already at William's house. The owner himself opened the door, still as calm and unruffled as ever. His appearance made it hard to guess what had happened. I want to thank you. The man finally allowed himself to smile. You were right. Lucy. She really wanted to. I'm afraid to say it out loud. Sophia wanted to poison that bastard. Adriana didn't bother. That's a lot to think about. I already trusted her. The story turned out to be banal and old as the world stick. Lucy was not going to put up with a rival in the form of her wealthy husband's favorite daughter. She wanted her own daughter Nancy to be the sole heir to William's entire fortune. Well, first she herself, of course. Lucy had once studied to be a pharmacist. However, she never worked a day in her profession, preferring to live off rich admirers. Nature generously gave her beauty, so that the opportunities for such an existence the woman had. Received in college knowledge was enough to think of a way to send the hated stepdaughter to the other world. A poison that is difficult to detect in blood, tissue unless specifically looked for. Lucy poured the toxic substance into the food she cooked for Sophia. And the girl weakened, slowly fading away. There was nothing left to do. It doesn't make sense. Unbelievable. Everything Adriana couldn't calm down. Julia understood her. Indeed, Lucy's act was monstrous. How could she do that to a defenseless child? Sophia trusted her, loved her. So William installed surveillance cameras in the kitchen. It turned out that Lucy was putting poison in Sophia's food every time. Sometimes she cooked something for the girl herself, and sometimes she managed to drip from a vial into the food, probably cooked in it. I used my own hands to take it to Sophia, the poison. Anyway, Lucy was caught red-handed. She was now under investigation. Nancy had been taken by her father, a man who had wanted to communicate with the child for a long time, but was prevented from doing so because he was too poor to do so, too unworthy. Sophia, and everything will be fine, Adriana assured her. The child was not to blame for what his mother wanted to create. And Sophia, how is she? Sophia is fine. There was a ringing voice from behind her. Julia turned around and met Sophia's eyes. She was still very thin and pale, but she had the strength to walk around the house. A real miracle. The doctors said she would recover quickly. Julia. James walked slowly along the shelves of the children's store. It was a section for girls. so it seemed to both of them as if they were in the realm of pink and purple. Dolls, baby cosmetics, soft toys. It was mind-boggling. When I was in Europe, a guy bought his nephew a voice-activated robot. This is the thing. Maybe Sophia would like something like that. She's a girl, reminds me of Julia, and she definitely wants a cartoon character doll. We should try to find one. Maybe next birthday she won't want toys at all. Kids grow up so fast. It's amazing. We'll soon see for ourselves. James put his hand on Julia's rounded belly. The baby responded immediately with a still weak but tangible kick. A year ago, right after Sophia had been rescued from her evil stepmother, Julia had been in for another surprise. She continued to live close to Sophia. Sophia was recovering quickly, mastering active games, asking to take her for walks all over the city. The girl was still very attached to Julia, and that one still needed a job, and Julia had gotten used to everyone. To the girl Adriana, even William did not want to part with them. The adults initially decided not to tell Sophia the truth about what had happened to her. It was too scary a story, but the sensible girl managed to put two and two together, listened to something, thought of something. The story itself did not have a strong, destructive effect on her, as adults feared. Sophia took everything quite calmly. Everything is just like in fairy tales. The girl shrugged her shoulders. The little girl was coming back to life. In September, she went to school with her peers. And Julia was finally able to recover at the university, chose a correspondence department, because she had to not only study, but also work. However, her work was more like living in a family with her relatives. Sweet, cheerful Sophia, kind, wise Vera Petrovna, always busy, but polite and attentive William. With these people, Julia was cozy, warm, and comfortable. They took her in still and were very grateful to her for her rescue. Sophia, it is scary to think what could have happened if not for that terrible dream. They discussed this unusual event. First, Betty had dreamed about Julia, then about William. Adriana was sure Betty had broken through time and worlds to save her daughter. William only shook his head and did not give his opinion. And Julia, she didn't know what to think. Perhaps Lucy had aroused her suspicions at once. After all, she had not liked Sophia's stepmother at first sight. More likely, Julia was running through the thoughts in her head. It is possible that they were transformed into unusual dreams. Except that William also dreamed Betty and asked him to believe. Julia found it more difficult to explain. That day, Julia left the house alone. Sophia was doing her homework. Adriana was doing chores around the house. Julia had to drive to the university to bring some documents to the dean's office. Suddenly, James stepped toward her. Julia couldn't believe her eyes from the Chantenou hair. And him? He looked happy and confused, smiling, looking at Julia as if there was no one more important to him in this world. "At last I found you," he said, and without delay he pressed her against him. Julia did not understand anything, but she did not resist. She pressed against her lover, enjoyed his closeness, and tried not to think about James's betrayal, about his sudden disappearance. The explanation turned out to be ridiculously simple. James simply dropped his phone into the ocean during a walk on a steamer. Naturally, the gadget disappeared irretrievably. Julia was not registered in social networks, so he simply could not contact her. No way. James wrote letters, like in the good old days of letters and telegrams. But Julia had moved in with William and was hardly ever home. So the letters piled up in the mailbox and then for some reason disappeared. Julia remembered this moment. One day she came home and saw that the mailbox door was broken. Someone had opened the box and taken the letters for some reason. Maybe the kids. Maybe a nosy neighbor. In short, Julia hadn't heard from James, so she assumed he'd forgotten about her. Started a new life, betrayed her. I couldn't just drop everything and leave. It was about my career and our future, our well-being. Without you, without news of you, it was unbearable. But I knew I would have to wait, and then financially I would be able to provide for us for many years to come. And then I could fly to you and explain everything. I had no idea. You're in some kind of dire straits. I didn't know you had to take out a loan. I didn't know you'd been laid off. It's been so hard on you. That's it. Just an unfortunate set of circumstances. Julia was glad that her feelings and James' feelings were real, that there was no betrayal or deception in her life. Just a misunderstanding that had finally been resolved. James now had a contract with a well-known producer in the capital. He had everything he dreamed of: concerts, gigs, tours, opportunities to take his music to people who were ready to accept it. And money? Money, of course. James was even able to buy an apartment for the two of them. It was in the middle of a renovation. James and Julia got married. They were already expecting a child. Julia felt happy and loved. She no longer worked for William. And a grown-up Sophia didn't need a 24-hour nanny to take care of her. But they all remained friends. And right now, Julia and James were picking out a 9th birthday present for Sophia that might not have been.
Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. It was 700 hours. It was time to leave the house. Stephen carefully stepped out into the hallway so as not to wake his mother, who had the only day off in the last week and a half. In the semi-darkness, Stephen looked for a brush to shine his shoes. "Why don't you turn on a light? Why are you walking in the dark?" Stephen twitched. His mother stood in the doorway in surprise, dressed in a terry cloth robe. It was obvious from her face that she hadn't had a good night's sleep and was probably torn with her son. "Jesus, Mom!" shrieked Stephen, theatrically clutching at his heart. "Why scare you in the dark?" "Because I didn't want yours, but something got in the way. But apparently it was me who woke you up. You're giving me a hard time. You should get married." "Mom, stop raising your voice a little," objected Stephen. "If you want me to move out, just tell me so." "Well, go on. That's not the point. I'd be happy to have you live with me forever. You're not really 20 years old anymore, are you?" "No. I should have a family by now. Or at least a girlfriend. All I have on my mind right now is my thesis. Okay, I gotta go. I have to teach my first class. I don't want the teacher to be late." "Well, you might want to think about it. I've got one." Stephen didn't want to listen to his mom and quickly ran out of the apartment. He was tired of listening to such conversations. For the last year and a half, his mother often started them. At first, the young man did not pay attention to them. After all, every mother sooner or later talks about marriage or marriage. However, Camille turned out to be a more persistent woman than she seemed to her son. Almost every day, she told Stephen directly that he was lonely. And if her son didn't do something about it in the near future, he would be left with his nose to the grindstone. Maybe she's right about something. I've never been in a serious relationship. I spent all my time studying, he thought to himself during his mother's fiery speeches. Stephen was a stocky brunette with blue eyes. As soon as he was born, everyone around him said that girls would chase after him. The people around him were right. However, the guy did not pay any attention to this. Since childhood, he was attracted to books on the world around him, classic fiction. Playing soccer with boys in the yard is not for him. But he still had to go out, as Mom insisted on taking sunbaths and daily told about the benefits of fresh air. These few hours were hard. Stephen tried to pretend he was having fun. He kept in touch with the boys. And the time spent socializing with his peers, Stephen always regretted. Since there was a sea at home, read books that his father brought him when he came from business trips. Christopher, Stephen's dad, is a lifelong engineer at an aircraft factory. He is considered a valuable member of the workforce, so management often sends him to other plants for training. Camille and Christopher lived together for 12 years. This time was the happiest for Stephen, despite the increasing quarrels of his parents. As a child, he did not pay much attention to it. However, as a teenager, after every time he heard his mother screaming, he felt as if a knife had pierced his heart. Stephen realized that the divorce would not pass. He dreamed of staying with his father afterward, as there was something more than father-son love that bound him to him. Christopher, as well as Stephen, was crazy about reading books. Every week, he would bring 5 new works into the house. For some people, that might have been enough for a month or two. However, Stephen's father would devour the books he brought in within 4 days. The salesmen in the bookstores thought he didn't work. That's why he read so much. That was not the case. Christopher worked 8-10 o'clock a.m. jobs at the company. He'd come home, help his wife with the housework. He didn't have any personal time until after the sun went down. Reading took up a lot of time he could have spent sleeping. But sleep, as they say, is for wimps. Stephen still remembers getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, walking down the corridor, and in the far room modestly burning Boss. Dad read until 3-4 o'clock. Of course, he didn't get much sleep, but his favorite occupation helped him to relax after a hard day's work and the next scandals with Camille. As a child, Stephen tried to understand why books attracted his father so much. When he asked him what was so fascinating about them, his father handed him a book by Jack London called Hearts of Three. Stephen did not want to read this work because he thought it was written for girls since it had the word hearts in the title. He overpowered himself. He came home after school, did his homework, and opened the book. Jack London's world sucked the boy in so much that he lost track of time. By 12 o'clock at night, he found that he had already read 2/3 of the work. He was eager to find out how the story would end. However, a shout from his mother at the other end of the house, who saw the light in his room, made it clear that it was time to go to bed. From then on, Christopher began to buy not 5 but 10 books a week. Camille did not welcome such a hobby, as she believed that the money spent could have been used for home improvements, upcoming renovations, the purchase of her personal car. But also, after all, the money should be given to her mother. Only she would know how to handle it. Yes, that's exactly what she thought. When the divorce began, Stephen was invited into the courtroom, asked who he wanted to stay with. Naturally, the boy, without hesitation, admitted that he would be more comfortable being with his father after he expressed his opinion. He was escorted out of the room where the meeting was taking place. Stephen was not worried, as he was confident that the judge would listen to him. When the hearing was over, the doors opened, and he saw his mother's happy face. Behind her walked Christopher, looking him in the eye. Stephen understood everything. It turns out that his mother has provided the judge with irrefutable evidence that it is better for her son to be with her, and only she knows how to properly build him a happy future. After this turn of events, Stephen was depressed. However, he came to terms with the decision. His father promised that he would visit him, often taking him for weekend sleepovers. This was the only thing that gave the boy strength. The years went by. Dad kept his word, despite the fact that it had been more than 15 years since the divorce. Christopher called his son every day, asking how he was doing. These conversations were a real outlet for Stephen. In them, they shared their opinions about the books they had read, and also recommended each other new works to familiarize themselves with modern literature. Because of the fact that the boy was fond of reading, Camille was afraid that he would enter the philological faculty or a higher education institution, the direction of which is devoted to the study of literature. It was a surprise to everyone that Stephen decided to follow in his father's footsteps. It cannot be said that he had no trouble getting into the first year of the best institute in the city. However, luck was on his side. Applicants with the highest scores chose other educational institutions, so Stephen got on the lists of people on the budget-based training. The first 2 courses were easy for him, as there were a lot of general subjects, and when the 3rd year began, Stephen realized that it would be difficult, but he was ready for everything. It was Christopher who helped him to keep his spirits up throughout his studies. He supported him in every way he could. When Stephen was down and his father saw it, he would call him to his workplace and show him in detail what he was going to do when he graduated. Camille was not thrilled with her son's choice of profession. She thought that he should have chosen a more promising specialty, such as programming. After all, in her opinion, people there do nothing and shovel money. Stephen's mother worked in the beauty industry, making women irresistible. Before attending an important event, as well as emphasized their beauty in everyday life. She worked as a makeup stylist, did hairstyles, makeup. The whole working day she spent on her feet, from which she was very tired. But she liked to feel useful and needed. Despite the fact that she was constantly surrounded by friends and her son, she was always lonely, although she did not admit it to anyone. So she tried to work without days off, and only when the pain in her legs became unbearably strong. She would take a vacation, but no more than one day. Because of this rigid working schedule, Camille Stephen managed to do everything during the day. After school, he would come home, do his homework, cook dinner, and spend time reading books. At the institute, he seemed close to everyone, so he had few friends. Stephen did not regret it, because he thought that there was nothing to talk about with these people, as they were only interested in partying and parties. Stephen's personal life was also going downhill. No, he wasn't a virgin. He had a couple one-night stands with girls he didn't know very well. It wasn't done out of love, just to drown his physiological needs. He wanted to find his love. But things were the same as with friends. The girls were only interested in expensive travel gifts of self-development. They clearly didn't want to engage. Why didn't they arouse interest in Stephen? After successfully completing the master's program, Stephen decided that he would continue his studies and enrolled in graduate school. Well established himself among the teaching staff. The guy was entrusted with conducting some disciplines. He liked to spend time with students. He paid enough attention to each of them to make them understand the subject and successfully pass the exam in the future. That day, after talking to his mother about the urgent need to get married, Stephen had to conduct the first pair in the subject of electrical engineering for Camille. The young man was 10 minutes late for the pair. By this time, all the students were in the assembly. They were very fond of the subjects that the young man was conducting. After the roll call was conducted, the young instructor noticed that there was one girl present in the classroom who was not on the list. He asked her to introduce herself and then found out that she had transferred to this group from another major. She was a fragile girl with big blue eyes, mustache, and hair. She stood out from the rest of the group. Therefore, Stephen figured she would have a hard time. As the pair came to the end of the class, the students thanked the instructor and scattered to go about their business on break. After Stephen collected all his materials from his desk into his briefcase, he noticed that the new girl was still in the classroom. "Stephen, hello. My name is Smith Emily." With shyness in her voice, said the student. "Good afternoon," smiled and answered the teacher, Smith Emily. "I am glad to welcome you to our group. Of course, it seems strange to me that you decided to transfer in the middle of the school year. I think it's going to be difficult for you." "Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I realize I missed a few classes, and I can't hide the fact that it was really hard for me right now. I didn't understand anything. Therefore, I would like to ask you to recommend me some literature that would allow me to catch up." At that moment, Emily put her purse on the table, opened it, and began to look for her daily planner. While Stephen was thinking about which method books to recommend to the student, he watched her every move and noticed that there were error search markers in the bag. "Are you interested in drawing?" the teacher inquired. "What? Oh yeah, you know, it's a real passion of mine. I have been drawing as long as I can remember. Can I see your works?" Emily did not refuse the teacher, despite the fact that her works were somewhat frank. The student confidently handed Stephen her beach sketch. The young man was at first embarrassed by the student's candid work, but continued to familiarize himself with her work. The spreads depicted nude and semi-nude, nude, male and female bodies, mostly without faces. All the reading lines and reliefs were done so filigree that Stephen could not think that the author of these works is a girl who is not yet 25. "You know, they are very beautiful works." Continuing to look, Stephen said, "I can't understand one thing, how you ended up in engineering." "Oh, Stephen, it's all very complicated. My father wanted me to get a good profession that would bring me a lot of money in the future. I don't like to argue with him. So I went to your institute." "What do you mean, our institute?" "But it's just that my home is 150 kilometers away. From here, I decided that it is better to leave my parents' house, to study at the university as my father wants, and to do my favorite business, like I want to do. Yes, yes, I understand you, as no one else smiling, said Stephen. After a short conversation with the new student, the young teacher dictated to her a list of teaching aids that would help her to understand the essence of the subject faster. At this, the young people said goodbye. Emily went to the next pair, and Stephen went to the department, where he was preparing for the next lecture. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening. The young man excused himself and went home. On the way, he stopped by a bookstore where he bought 2 new detectives. Stephen was in a great hurry, as he dreamed of starting reading as soon as possible. After all, it was these books that caused a great stir among the population of the whole planet. Opening the door to the apartment, he noticed that on the threshold there were 2 pairs of women's shoes, which his mother did not have. Apparently, she had visitors. "Mom, hi. I'm not hungry. I'll go to my room. I bought new books. I'll read." "Oh, Sashenka, we've been waiting for you. Why did you take so long?" Out of breath, Mother asked. "I had to replace Rick, who got sick. The students have exams coming up, so they can't miss classes. God, but you don't take care of yourself at all. Come on, I'd better introduce you to someone." Camille took Stephen by the hand and led him into the kitchen. When he crossed the threshold, he noticed a smartly set table where 2 women were sitting. One of them was about 45 years old, and the other was apparently her daughter, because he gave her a look no older than 21. Stephen immediately realized what was going on. Despite this, he was in shock, because his mother had never allowed herself such antics before. "I don't get it. Is this matchmaking? Are we living in the 19th century? Son, can you believe it? Evelyn just happened to be walking by our house with her daughter Jenna. We ran into each other in the driveway when I was coming back from the store. Evelyn is an old friend of mine. I'd really like you to meet her," Camille said without making a show of it. It didn't bother her that there was some confusion on her son's face. "Hello, Evelyn. Nice to meet you. Jenna, my respects." At that moment, Stephen pretended to take off his hat. Camille was shocked by this prank. Her son had always had good manners, and what had happened to him now was beyond her comprehension. The woman quickly came to her senses and continued to steer the conversation in the right direction. Jenna sat with the man at the table. It was immediately obvious that she was not happy about this turn of events either. However, the simplicity of the young man helped her to relax and enjoy the conversation. After looking around the table, Stephen concluded that his mother had put a lot of effort and spent a lot of money to prepare all these exquisite dishes. He had no other choice, so he sat down at the table and started talking to his guest. "Stephen, Evelyn, you can imagine. Jenna graduated from medical school this year. She was going to enter the institute. However, at a family council, they decided that the best medical training happens abroad. So Camille and Wendy decided that Jenna would go to medical school in Germany. Yes, they did. But I realized that Evelyn and Wendy had decided. I'm interested in a different question, and Jenna agrees with their decision," Stephen asked, shifting his eyes to the girl. "Yes, of course. Stephen, can you imagine what opportunities will open up before me? It's the most advanced technology out there. Pharmaceutical companies annually release hundreds of new drugs that allow you to fight diseases. People with cancer are successfully treated abroad, while in Russia patients die for lack of quality treatment. My dad is the best oncologist in the region. I am very interested in what he does. Our whole family is medical professionals. My mom works with kids. She's a pediatrician. So anyway, I get it. My mom found me not just a bride, but a good match. We're definitely in the 19th century," Stephen thought to himself. The conversation lasted until about 2 o'clock. During this time, Camille managed to tell all the background of her son, and also to show a picture of him as a little boy, lying with a bare butt. Stephen found it difficult to control his emotions. However, he managed to do it. During the meal, the young man saw that in the eyes of Evelyn and her daughter Jenna there is interest, which increases with every minute spent in this house. At one point, Camille called Evelyn into the room to show her collection of house flowers. Of course, this was all done intentionally to leave Stephen and Jenna alone. This made the young man feel even more awkward than when he came home and discovered his guests. The girl started talking about herself, how much she wanted to help people, about how she likes to spend her free time with her friends in cafes or clubs. Stephen had mixed feelings about it. The girl was not stupid. It was hard for him to understand how such a desire to study could intersect with the constant partying in her life. Speech. Jenna was coherent and literate. She had clear thoughts in her head, interesting plans for her life. Yes, she was undoubtedly not the type that usually surrounded Stephen. Despite this, the guy did not feel any attraction to this girl at all. The bulk of the time while the young people were alone, Jenna spoke. Sometimes she realized that she was becoming too much, and she began to ask Stephen questions. Mostly they were questions about his personal life. It made him uncomfortable because that was the life he had been counting and didn't have. He struggled to get out of awkward situations, answered uncomfortable questions, and secretly wished it would all be over as quickly as possible. Late in the afternoon, Evelyn and Jenna started to head home. The prospective mother-in-law showered Stephen with many compliments. In doing so, she hinted to her daughter that she had an enviable groom standing in front of her. In her opinion, he was promising because he was the son of a famous engineer. Stephen thanked the guests for the pleasant conversation, smiled, and escorted them to the door. "What do you think?" It was immediately clear from his mother's voice that she thought everything had gone well. "I'll tell you what I think. About the fact that you, without consulting me, arranged this viewing. Why was that necessary? And more importantly, who needed it? What makes you think you can decide for me?" Did Stephen sound anxious and irritable? "Son, I've had 1,000,000 conversations about how it's time for you to get married, but you do nothing. How long can I wait? Do you realize that if things continue like this, I won't have grandchildren at all? I don't want anyone to call me grandmother, but I'd love to see our family continue. Mom, what lineage are you talking about? Don't you understand? To start a family, you have to meet someone who makes your heart respond. You can't do things the way you've arranged them today. In your opinion, if a man is promising, then he's worthy of continuing the so-called lineage." "Of course I do. What else could it be, son? You wanted a son. I will never let that happen. Who's gonna ask you? I'm almost 30 years old. I'm in a position to decide who I start a family with and when, much less have children." Stephen realized that a dialogue with his mother would not lead to anything good. Camille was in no mood for any kind of compromise, and this family needed it because she considered her son too infantile, unable to build a successful and rich life. "Look, Stephen, two parents should have a perfect set of genes when it comes to procreation. You have to choose your mate responsibly. It will be difficult for you to get married now because, as you said yourself, you are almost 30 years old. Mother's tone has changed. It's as if she's become much calmer. Thus misleading. I don't see you thanking me for having dinner tonight with such distinguished people of our town. You should be happy that I found you an educated prospective bride who is just over 20 years old. You know what that means? That she can give you a healthy baby. Every year it's harder for a woman to carry a fetus to term. The likelihood of genetic diseases increases. Have you thought about that?" To be honest, Stephen was on the edge. He just didn't know what to do or how to end this pointless conversation. He knew that his mother could only back off on one condition, and that was that he had to agree with her. "Lady, you know, I hadn't really thought of that. You're probably right. Jenna's a really nice girl. Maybe I should consider her for a fiancé." He wasn't going to do that, of course. However, that answer completely satisfied Camille, who broke out into a blissful smile. On her face was the expression of a victor after a difficult and bloody battle. That was partly what this dialogue was. I'm glad, sweetheart, that you have at least one bright thought in your head. Mommy knows what's best for you. You have to trust your mom. You won't regret this choice. Jesus, what choice is she talking about? I was just saying we could consider why she thinks the choice is already made. I've dragged myself to the bottom, and it's going to be extremely difficult to get out. These were the thoughts that were swirling around in Stephen's head. For now, he remained silent and smiled, hoping that his mother would now go to get ready for bed. The young man thought that after all that had happened, he would fall asleep somewhere on the way to the bed. His body prayed, leaden eyelids heavier, his consciousness drifting off somewhere far away. However, it only turned out to be a defensive reaction to everything that had happened. Stephen's body was fighting back as best it could, giving him these signals. When he reached the bed, the young man came to the conclusion that Jenna was not the heroine of his novel. For a second, he felt sad that there was no girl in his life who could attract his attention. Despite the constant support of his father, Stephen would very much like to be loved, pitied, and supported when he comes home. Ideally, all of this should have been done by his mother, but she was preoccupied with other matters. At some point, Stephen realized that the image of Smith and Emily was popping up in his mind. Partly he felt sorry for her, because she wasn't doing what she would have wanted to do at the Institute. Her work in sketchbook was really good and deserved the attention of others. He was sure that Emily had some large-sized paintings in her arsenal, painted in colors rather than markers. When his thoughts turned from the matchmaking he had constructed to the new student, he calmed down. His body relaxed as much as possible. The brain cleared of heavy thoughts, and Stephen drifted into sleep. The next day, he had to go to work by 12 o'clock. So the young man managed to get a good night's sleep. Stephen woke up to the fact that the sun's rays began to break through the curtain. The sun was playing across his bed, getting rays in his eyes. Upon waking up, the young man noticed that his mother was not at home. This was good news for him, because he could spend the morning in complete peace, have breakfast, prepare for the upcoming lectures, check the students' work that he had to check yesterday. As he passed by the hallway, he noticed a couple of books that had been bought yesterday. He felt a little sad because he had dreamed to start reading them yesterday. But because of everything that had happened, it would have to wait until tonight. Unless Camille comes up with something else interesting. Stephen didn't make it to the bus stop on time, so he missed the bus. The intervals between transportation were long, so he had to call a cab. After selling the car for 15 minutes, he jumped into it, gave the driver the address of the university, and relaxed. There were surprisingly quite a lot of cars in the city today, even though it was a regular weekday with no holiday dates ahead. But still, the streets were filled with people, on whose faces a certain puzzled look appeared on Stephen's face when it was only 350 meters to the university. The cab in which he was traveling became stuck in traffic. Looking out of the window, the young man noticed a small accident that took up one lane of traffic. There was an adjuster standing on the road helping the traffic flow. He immediately realized that if he stayed in the car, he would be late for the lecture. So Stephen took cash out of his wallet, gave it to the driver, and said goodbye. Jumping out of the car, he looked at his watch. He was only 15 minutes away from the lecture he was supposed to be giving. It was only 15 minutes away. He shoved his briefcase under his arm and ran as fast as he could. On the way, he had to push people who were clearly not in a hurry to get to class. He even saw his students among them. He wanted to shout something encouraging. Maybe they would rush to the upcoming lecture after that. When Stephen turned towards the students, there was a violent collision. The young man managed to stay on his feet, but he noticed a girl lying on the pavement. Markers and sketches of drawings had fallen out of her bag and were lying on the pavement. Stephen immediately realized that it was Smith Emily. Everyone around them froze. At first, it was not clear whether the girl was conscious or not. The young teacher ran up to Emily. At that moment, she began to rise. Everyone exhaled, including Stephen. "Oh my God. Emily, you're all right. Can you tell me what hurts?" Should I see a doctor or call an ambulance? Fuck the ambulance. By the time they get here, you might bleed to death. I'll take a cab to the hospital. Stephen, calm down. What are you? Like an elephant in a china shop. I can't say I'm all right. My knees are very sore. At that moment, Emily raised the hem of her dress a little. From there showed slender, graceful calves and knees that were shattered all over. A new colored blood started from them. Stephen's heart clenched. He was deeply ashamed. Without thinking, he gathered up all the markers and sketches, put them in Emily's bag, picked her up on his arm, and ran as fast as he could. On the way, he wondered where to take Emily. The girl at this moment was very much surprised, but could not utter a word. If it had been an ordinary person and not her teacher, she would have started screaming, swearing, fighting. But how to behave in this situation that had developed, and she had no idea. Running up to the institute, Stephen, with Emily in his arms, climbed the stairs and turned in the direction of the infirmary. Its doors were closed. Stephen was angry. He could barely contain himself from swearing at the whole institute. Emily, do you have a nail stick? You could hear in his voice that he was holding back his rage. The girl was discouraged by such a question, as she couldn't understand why he needed it. Sawing nails didn't seem like a good time. Yes, of course there is. Here you go. Stephen took Emily's wand and headed towards the castle. Fortunately, it turned out to be the easiest. It could be opened with a single movement of the hand. Entering the infirmary, Stephen rushed to find hydrogen peroxide, absorbent cotton, and bandages. Emily all this time stood dumbfounded by the sight, on the threshold of which she could not cross. When Stephen had everything he needed in his hands, he turned to the girl. Why are you standing there? Come in. I'll treat your wounds. Stephen, thank you, of course, but I could have waited for the nurse to come back. Or, at the very least, I can treat my own knees. Stephen's expression changed immediately. He didn't like to say the same thing twice. So he walked confidently toward the girl, took her in his arms, carried her into the medical center, and sat her on the couch. Stephen, but really, I can handle it myself. Emily, please sit quietly. I'm responsible for what happened. I have to make it up to you somehow. If you think I have a beef with you, you're mistaken. You didn't deliberately run at me, I hope. If it had been intentional, I'd classify you as a peculiar person. But you're a decent man, a teacher. I realize you were just late, so you were in a hurry, not looking around. Please leave it alone. I'll work on my own wounds. Stephen looked sternly at the student, knelt down in front of her so that he could clearly see the injuries and help revive them as soon as possible. He knew how to administer first aid, so this did not cause him any difficulty. The whole process took no more than 5 minutes. When he was done, he raised his head to look at Emily. A wide smile was visible on her face. Emily, do you feel better? To be honest, Stephen, not really. Then why are you smiling? I just noticed that when you were treating my knee with hydrogen peroxide and then smearing it with green, you were blowing on my knee like it was the most precious thing in your life. Well, maybe not the most precious, but the most beautiful, Stephen thought, stretched into a smile. Emily, it's just that I cause you a lot of trouble and pain. I tried very hard to make sure the procedure didn't cause you any discomfort. I hope I did the right thing, so that when you see me, you won't be reminded of this horrible incident. We exchanged a few words. The young people noticed that they were already 30 minutes late for their class. To keep the rumors from spreading around the school, Stephen sent Smith Emily first. When she left, the young man gathered all his things, left the office, and was about to close the door so that the nurse, who would soon be back in place, would not notice anything. I'm embarrassed to ask, what's going on here? Out of consternation, the nail squirrel he had taken from Emily fell out of Stephen's hands. Turning around, he noticed a stout adult woman in a white coat standing in front of him. It was obvious that she was a nurse. Stephen tried to think of a story that would make the woman feel comfortable with Emily's blood on the cuffs of his shirt. It was a good excuse to tell the nurse, a heart-wrenching situation that had his blood pressure rising. His nose was bleeding, and the staff at the nurse's station was not on site. By the look on the woman's face, you could tell right away that she didn't really believe the story. But she had little choice if she'd made a scandal of it. And the young man's bleeding was real. She could have been fired for leaving her workplace waving him off. She let him go. Stephen ran into the auditorium like a sunburned man. A look of surprise was written on the faces of the students. Occasional chuckles were heard around the auditorium. The young instructor was embarrassed for his students to witness this horror of a low embarrassment with Emily Smith. He had no choice but to pretend as if nothing had happened. In today's lecture, he was extremely serious. This was unusual for the students because Stephen was usually known around the institute for his good sense of humor, loyalty, and kindness. When the class was over, Stephen turned his back to the students and told them they were free to go. He was very embarrassed about what had happened before class. He did not turn around until the footsteps in the classroom stopped. When he was convinced that the students had left the room, he turned around, hoping that he would be getting ready now. To his surprise, standing in front of the faculty table was Smith, Emily with her big blue eyes. She looked at Stephen. "Later, Emily, I am so embarrassed. You will please forgive me again for everything. Why did you stay in the auditorium? I can help you with something." "Stephen, stop worrying. It's all behind you now, especially since you did a very professional job on my knee." At that moment, both Emily and Stephen smiled sincerely at each other, which made both of them uncomfortable. "So anyway, what can I do for you? You know, I've never acted like this in my life. There's something I'd like to tell you more than anything. I don't know how you're gonna react to it, but still." Stephen's heart was pumping at a frantic pace. He didn't understand what was happening to him and why this student bothered him so much. Emily lowered her eyes to the floor, took a deep breath, and said, "Stephen, would you like to invite me in for a cup of coffee?" "What? So it's just like that? What makes her think I'd even want to ask her out? I don't know if I would or not. Who am I kidding? Emily, this is very sudden. And yet I have to ask you if it bothers you that you're a student and I'm a teacher. I'm almost 10 years older than you." "Oh no, it doesn't bother me at all. I just feel like you and I are soulmates. I'd like to get to know you as well as I can. I don't insist that we must have a relationship, just a chat." After these words, Emily's appearance was so innocent that Stephen could not refuse her. To tell the truth, he himself would like to get to know his student better. Even though the rules of the university contradicted it, Stephen looked at the girl with a bewildered look, and at some point realized that an idiotic smile was shining on his face. Quickly switching from Emily to his notes, he took 3 deep breaths, which, according to psychological practice, promised to bring calmness. "To be honest, this is very unexpected, I'll admit to you. I do feel, as you do, that we have much in common. So I'd love to invite you in for a cup of coffee or tea, whichever you prefer. But here's the thing. I don't get off until 7:00 p.m. every day. That's not a problem. Then I suggest we meet at 8:00 at the entrance to the city park. There's a good coffee shop nearby. The coffee's really good, and so are the desserts. It's great. I'd really like desserts. I look forward to seeing you again. Bye." After saying that, the girl turned around and left, with a quick limp. Stephen, it was very painful to look at her. He kept blaming himself for what he had done. In his mind, it seemed as if he had agreed to this meeting only because he was the one responsible for her broken knees. He wanted to do as many nice things for this girl as possible that would help make up for his guilt. Toward the end of the workday, the young man sat in the department and checked the students' papers. There was no one around. In his head, there were some rambling thoughts that distracted him from his work. Because of this, he had to check the control papers several times to find mistakes that were not detected at the first check. This feeling was new to him. His heart was failing him too. No, it wasn't aching. It was pounding at a frantic pace. It seemed to him that if anyone else were in the office, he would hear his heartbeat, which sounded like a drum solo in his head. He put his left hand to his chest. It seemed to him that it would make things better. Stephen was confused. Pens and pencils were falling out of his hands. Maybe I have poems by Accord and I never knew. I should ask for an excuse to go to the dean's office and make a doctor's appointment. His hand was already reaching for the work first aid kit to take a Valadol or Corvalol. Just in time, he remembered he had a date with Emily. What date? Am I crazy? It's just a meeting. We're just gonna talk, have coffee, and I have to pay for it. I have to pay for her, but she might see it as a date. Stephen realized that he couldn't cope with the excitement and this new feeling, so he decided to quit. After all, he'd have time to check the tests tomorrow morning. It was early 8 o'clock on the clock. Time to move out. Stephen collected all the student work, his notes and briefcase, listed in front of the mirror, and went to the exit. In the corridor met the dean, who detained him. Their conversation about upcoming competitions and grants took over 20 minutes. Because of this, Stephen was catastrophically late for his meeting with Emily. The young man hailed a cab, which arrived 5 minutes later. Jumping into the car, he gave the driver the address and leaned back in the back seat. The closer he drove to the city park, the more his heartbeat increased. Stephen absent-mindedly considered the possibility that he was really sick. When he got out of the car, Emily was already waiting for him near the entrance to the park. With each step, he found it harder to breathe. It was getting harder. His heart was pounding, harder and harder. At some point his throat lumped up, and he couldn't even say hello to the girl. He had to react quickly. So instead of the usual greeting, he extended his right hand to the girl, and with his left hand he pretended to take off his hat. This made Emily laugh a lot. As she started up in a golden laugh, Stephen noticed that he was relieved. Stephen and Emily headed deeper into the park along the center avenue. For the first few minutes, they walked in complete silence, which made them both feel awkward. At some point, the girl began to talk about her hobbies. Stephen was very pleased with the fact that she liked to read books. As it turned out, young people have the same tastes. They almost simultaneously read all the novelties that appear in the bookstore. In addition, Emily told how she began to engage in drawing. Stephen did not hear anything original, but this did not prevent him from listening to the girl with interest since childhood. Emily liked to draw with pencils, colors with felt-tip pens. Sometimes there was not even enough paper for all her masterpieces, which she produced in a day. That's why the little girl used as a canvas everything she could get her hands on: documents, curtains, mirrors, windows, and even bed linen. Emily told her life stories with such a childlike sincerity, which instantly allowed her to draw the young teacher to her. All the while, a smile never left Stephen's face. It had been a long time since he had felt so good. One could even say that he was happy, really happy. He felt as if he had not lived before, but existed. He couldn't get out of his head why he was attracted to this girl. It could not be said that she was some kind of model appearance. After all, according to the stories of friends, this is what they pay attention to when meeting the opposite sex. Stephen was pleased to listen to Emily. He did not want to interrupt her. The last thing he wanted was for this evening to end. The young man realized that sooner or later he would have to talk and tell something about himself, and she was waiting for that. But he dared not interrupt Emily and tell her about his life. And what did he have to tell about how he lived with his mother in a 3-room apartment in the center of the city? How his mother wouldn't let him take a step without her permission. He was ashamed. He didn't want Emily to get the impression that he was a mama's boy. He wasn't. He tried to fight the matriarchy in the house, but he wasn't very good at it. And instead of the sweet feeling of victory after an argument with his mother, he constantly felt guilty. Especially when Camille clutched at her heart and screamed that Stephen was trying to drive her to her grave. God, I don't even have anything to say about my life. After 2 o'clock, it started to get colder outside, so the young people decided to stop by the coffee shop Stephen had talked about during the day. They were both surprised that their orders were the same. Coco and Napoleon. Were you peeking at my order? Emily shrieked sharply, theatrically putting her hands at her sides. No, you were watching me, young lady, replied Stephen, laughing. Laughing, Stephen replied. I'm not. Where did you find a young lady? I'm a grown-up, independent, and self-sufficient woman. Of course, my father didn't want me to move so far away from my parents' home. It was my choice. I've been living in your city for 3 years, and I've never asked my parents for money. I make my own living. It's not much, but I'm sure that in the future my work will be appreciated, and I'll be able to live well. Okay, I'm sure. I'm just kidding. Don't mind me. Stephen, I've noticed that the 2.5 hours we spend together, I'm the only one talking. Can you please tell me something about yourself? Stephen agreed. But did he have a choice? The young man said that since childhood he had been drawn to knowledge, that his father had accustomed him to books, and now he could not spend a single evening without reading. He did not talk about the fact that everything was not smooth in his family. Emily didn't need to know that Stephen's parents were divorced, and his mother couldn't stand his father. And she certainly didn't need to learn that her mother's main job, in her opinion, was to arrange for her son's matchmaking and marriage. The young teacher was quickly going over in her head the topics on which to talk. When there were pauses, Emily tried to ask leading questions on topics of interest to her. It was by chance that she learned that Stephen had decided to follow in his father's footsteps. It turned out that Christopher was known even in the city where the girl came from. She was pleasantly surprised, as she had read in the newspaper's interviews with the outstanding engineer. She especially liked Christopher's articles on various subjects. Stephen was very much surprised that Emily was aware of who his father was. It turned out that she even knew that Christopher and Camille were divorced. Stephen's dad had mentioned it in passing in some interview. At some point, the young teacher felt an irresistible urge to take the girl's hand, but he couldn't afford it, as they had to observe the elementary subordination. To be honest, he was a little shaken at the thought that they might be seen by students or professors from the institute. If they thought something untoward was going on, Stephen would lose his job. It was obvious to Emily that she was very eager to touch the young man. She tried to touch him in every possible way, supposedly by accident. In the coffee shop, the young people spent another hour and a half. It was already about 23 o'clock on the clock. Stephen said that the time had passed catastrophically unnoticed and suggested Emily to go away. Yes, you're probably right. But Stephen, don't you know it's etiquette for a young man to walk a girl home? What? Oh yes, but you see, Emily, it's only permissible if there are romantic feelings between a man and a woman. And you don't. At that moment, Stephen was lost. Never before in his life had a girl behaved so openly in his presence. Where had he ever seen a woman declare all her desires at the first meeting? He didn't know what to do in this situation. He wanted very much to walk Emily home, but this prim pedantry prevented him from agreeing to this adventure. Where do you live? It's not far. Come along. To his surprise, the young man obeyed Emily. When they left the park, they turned into Dark Lane. The girl reached timidly with her fingers for Stephen's hand. To say that he was discouraged was like saying nothing. His hand remained unmoved while Emily's fingers gently stroked his. At the same time, they did not speak, walked in silence. Words were unnecessary here. Emily's heart was beating in a frantic rhythm. She had never acted so unbridled in her life. She felt as if she were scaring the young teacher away from her, but she didn't want that. She wanted to get closer to him. A wave of passion and attraction was washing over her. She became a hostage to her heart. Emily was willing to do anything to make Stephen respond to her actions. What scared her most in life was rejection. Rejection of her. The girl, like Stephen, had never been in a serious relationship. It seemed to her, too, that the men around her thought more of their animal instincts. Intimacy with the opposite sex was intimidating. But things were different with this guy. Stephen was still walking the same way, frozen. Fear. Only fear kept him from responding to Emily's actions. It was hard for him to explain where the feeling came from, and what exactly he was afraid of. It could have been misunderstanding from the mother of the people around him, coworkers and students. Yes, it could have been judgment from the outside that he would not want to experience. Meanwhile, Emily's actions became more confident. She went wa the bank. The girl decided that she had nothing to lose, and it was now that everything should be decided. If the young and attractive teacher did not respond to her already far from timid actions, she would let him go. It was clear from the student's fingers what she wanted. Stephen stopped squeezing her hand, whereupon his fingers tangled with Emily's slender, neat fingers. This was the moment when the young people realized that they cared about each other. "Stephen, are you comfortable?" "Yes, but I'm not." "Emily, why not?" "I think our atmosphere would be more favorable if we switched to you." "I don't know. Do you think it's appropriate? After all, we're faculty." "Student, yes it is. But we're not in lecture, we're not in counseling. We're actually on a date. I thought we were meeting to get to know each other." "We are. But we originally met because we have some warm feelings for each other that shouldn't be between a teacher and a student." Stephen was lying to himself when he talked about not feeling anything for Emily. His heart and body spoke of something else. This was the only girl he was comfortable with, and he had decided to risk his relationship with his mother, work in science, and teaching. At that very moment, he didn't care about anything but this young and awe-inspiring creature holding his hand. No longer did the young people address each other in you. Their hands clasped each other more tightly, and when Stephen took Emily home, he did not want to let her go. Emily felt the same way, and she wanted very much to invite Stephen to her house. But the fear that the young man would misunderstand her took over. When they reached the entrance, they stopped. Emily, without letting go of his hand, turned to the boy. For several minutes they stared into each other's eyes. It was hard to tell what they saw in them. It's not for nothing they say that the eyes are the mirror of the soul. Stephen still stood in confusion. He didn't know what to do next. They should have said goodbye a long time ago, gone their separate ways. But the girl and the man looked into each other's eyes and held hands without a break. At some point, Emily realized that she had to act first. She stood on her tiptoes a little and reached for Stephen's face. At that moment, his brain shut down. He reflexively reached up, and their lips met. At first, it was a gentle, childlike kiss, but with each passing second, the passion increased, and their lips greedily embraced each other. Tums unapologetically entered another space, exploring the terrain. When the kiss ended, Stephen said it was getting late. He hugged Emily goodbye, and they parted. The young man lived not far from the student. On the way home, he was in high spirits. Had Stephen met someone he was ready to go on with? How can it be that two people with the same interests, views on life met only now? Let's be honest, it wasn't the best of circumstances. But Stephen waved goodbye to everything, just to feel happy for a moment. As he approached the entrance, he noticed a girl standing under the visor. It was a strange phenomenon, as it was already approaching 0 o'clock. As he took a few more steps closer, he saw Jenna standing near the door. "Jenna, hello. What are you doing here?" "Oh, Stephen, you don't know how long I've been waiting here for you. I was in the neighborhood. I thought I'd come to visit, but there was no one home, so I thought I'd wait for you here." The young man was very much surprised. If someone passes by the house and decides to visit, and there is no one there, he just turns around and leaves. But why did she stay here? Why is she waiting for him? "How long have you been waiting for me?" "You know, I thought it hadn't been more than half an hour, but it's been almost 2 o'clock. 200 waiting. You really must have something going on." "No, I just really wanted to see you." "I'm honored. Thank you." Stephen felt uncomfortable. He realized he liked Jenna, but he didn't feel the same way. "So are we just gonna stand here like this?" "You will." "Jenna, it's too late. I have to check the students' test papers. I promised I'd announce their results tomorrow. Perhaps you should go home. I'm sorry you waited so long for me." "Stephen, But I think they won't be offended if you don't announce the grades. If you tell them that you spent that time with a pretty girl you like, they'll understand your position and take it all in stride. Yeah, except I'd be lying. What do you mean? Jenna, I'm sorry, you're a very nice girl, aren't you? But under the circumstances, if you and I had met without the help of our parents, maybe something would have happened between us. But under these circumstances, there can't be any relationship between us. I can't say I don't like you. I like you, but as a friend. A friend is just a friend. Think about it. We can have a beautiful family. We're not the last people in this town. We're very promising. If we get married, we'll go abroad together, and they'll take good engineers. Jenna, wait, we haven't even been on a date yet. That's unnecessary. We're modern people living in the 21st century. No, I'm sorry. I just want to get this conversation over with as soon as possible. If my mom promised you something, you can have it. Don't bring me into this. I'm going home now. You call a cab and leave. Please don't ever come here again. After these words, Stephen turned away and entered the entrance, going up to his floor. His thoughts stayed in his head. He had never been so hard on other people before. Always went along to get along, but not this time. And he realized why things were happening this way. It's Emily's fault, or rather, it was her fault for what she had done to his heart and head. Entering the apartment, Stephen was surprised. The TV was on and his mom was lying on the couch. Mom, hi, I'm home. Oh, Stephen, I've been waiting for you for so long. Where have you been? Oh, wait, let me guess. You were with Jenna. How was the date? I don't know who Jenna is. What date? You weren't with her. Where were you? Did you even see the time? You don't care if your mom's at home worrying. You were worried sick when you thought I was with Jenna. That's why you were so excited to see me. Oh, I see. I guess Jenna didn't wait for you. How do you know she waited for me? Someone rang the doorbell while you were out. I went over, looked through the peephole, saw Jenna there. To be honest, at first I didn't want to open the door because I wasn't at my best. But the girl was very persistent. Eventually, I let her into the apartment, and we talked. She said she really wanted to see you, and that she liked you. To be honest, I was really excited, because, as I said before, this is a very good match for your future wife. Mom, let's just leave it at that. What happened next? Well, I told her you were due back from school soon. I suggested that she wait for you downstairs. I thought when you saw her, you'd be pleased. But apparently I miscalculated. Yes, I sent her away and asked her never to come here again. What? How dare you? Do you realize whose daughter she is? She'll never forgive you after that. Stephen, who needs you at your age? Whoever needs you, needs you. I don't get it. With your eyebrows together, Camille asked. Can I ask you more about that? Stephen decided to tell his mom the truth. Maybe then she would leave him alone. The young man told Camille that a girl had come into his life. They have many common interests and feel an irresistible attraction to each other. During the heightened narrative, Camille's face was constantly changing. Such colorful emotions that changed every minute he had never seen before. He did not know how his mother would react to all this. He didn't feel like fighting. However, the feeling of dread that lodged in his chest said otherwise. His stomach grumbled as if he hadn't eaten in 3 days. After listening to Stephen, Camille threw her hands up in the air and threw a real tantrum. It had to be admitted that she had gotten into the wrong school at the wrong time. She should definitely have tried her luck in the acting department. Camille was the person for whom Oscar cried. And she cried. She screamed. She was silent. She pretended to gasp. She was trying to get it into Stephen's head that this was his biggest mistake in life. After all he had done, he would not be forgiven by the young girl and her parents. The mother was trying to prove to her son that you can't be so irresponsible with life. Do you understand? I can see it in your eyes. Stephen, a few years ago, you chose your profession responsibly. You thought through all your options. Your specialty is one of the most promising. Not as promising as a programmer, of course, but still you chose it yourself. Unsure you were guided not by your heart, but by your brain. You should do the same with choosing a future wife. What are you doing, son? You chased away such a beautiful girl, and instead walks with some frame who came from a neighboring town. Don't you realize she's trying to get a job here on your dime? At our expense. Stephen's got his wits about him. Even though Stephen hadn't taken his mother's words seriously for a long time, for some reason he thought about what she had said now. Because right now, Camille could be right. He didn't know anything about Emily. Why was she so keenly interested in a young teacher? Yes, she probably just wants to find a free place to live, earn an automatic in electrical engineering. No, this is a pure and sincere person. She can't do that. Or can she? The scandal went on for no more than another 10 minutes. At some point, Stephen realized that he had reached an impasse. He needed to think it over, to make the right decision. But he didn't know who to ask. What exactly would be considered the right decision? In his head, the thoughts scattered smoothly in different directions formed a void. Silence. Stephen fell asleep. The next day, when Stephen woke up, he found that his throat was sore. On top of that, his temperature was elevated to 38.5. His whole body ached as if he had been ponderously beaten all night. One thing was clear. He would not be going to work today. At first he was upset because he wouldn't be seeing Emily. Then he decided that it was a good opportunity to think things over properly and make the right decision. He called the department chair, alerted the dean, and made an appointment with the doctor. Stephen realized that the doctor would definitely give him a sick leave, which would last at least 10 days. Yes, that would be enough time. Camille was not at home. She had gone somewhere early in the morning, probably to the market for fresh vegetables. He went to the pharmacy to buy some medicine. It was not far from his house, literally 30 meters away. When Stephen was on his way to the entrance, he looked up and saw Emily near the steps. He wasn't surprised. He just didn't have the energy for it. He didn't understand why the women were following him. Why had Emily come here? The girl stood in a light floral dress just above the knee. On her shoulder was a pink bag, and in her hands a branded bag from the store, in which oranges were visible. Stephen, hi. How are you? I was really freaked out today when Jack showed up for steam instead of you. I thought something serious had happened. I ran to the department, but the secretary said you were ill. I hope it's nothing serious. Hello, Emily. Well, I don't know how serious it is, but I have a sore throat. It's a lousy condition, of course. Why did you come here? What do you mean? To check on you, to give you an orange so you can get vitamins and get well soon. I missed you. At that moment, the girl raised her eyes to Stephen a few times, playfully clapped her eyelashes, and pouted her lips. Emily, you forgive me, but what are you apologizing for again? I really don't have the energy. I don't know what happened yesterday. I've never been through anything like this before in my life, so I need time to think. Think about what? Emily asked in surprise. I'd like to take charge of yesterday's situation. Why did that happen? Why do I have these feelings for you? Why are you so open with me? Why are you so assertive after all? These are the kind of questions that are sitting in my head right now. You know, there must be a catch, but I can't see it. You attract me like a magnet. I've never had that in my life. I'll tell you the truth. I'd like to hold your hands for the rest of my life and never let go. It's like you've been stealing from me. If we lived 300 years ago, I'd really think you were engaging in hostile behavior. What are you talking about? Tears began to well up in Emily's eyes. She could no longer keep a steady, calm voice. She was shaking. What fight? I opened up to you. I gave you the key to my heart. Did you use it? Entered the hearts. Now you want to break it. No, Emily, I'm just not familiar with this whole thing. I'm scared, to be honest. Stephen wouldn't tell the girl that her mother was against their relationship. He didn't think it was information that deserved her attention. They looked at each other in silence for a few minutes. Stephen was pained to see the tears in Emily's eyes. He stretched his arms forward and spread them slightly apart, letting the girl know that he was ready to hug her. She instantly responded to his call, snuggled against his chest, and catted his neck with her arms. It so happened that Emily had received a stab in the heart in 15 minutes, and then a fit of tenderness and revelation from Stephen. She knew what he was talking about. After all, she had experienced the same thing. Despite this, she truly believed that the feeling that was spilling inside of her was the truest love. This little conversation with Emily helped Stephen forget the tantrum his mother had thrown. There was no going back to that conversation. Apparently, she was confident that her son had listened to her. The young man was on sick leave for 10 days. His mom was with him only in the evenings. During the day, Stephen was visited by Emily, who told him news from the Institute local gossip and also shared impressions of the lectures that Jack held. One of the days, Camille was at work. Emily, as always, after studying, approached the entrance of Stephen. The young man was waiting for her at the same time every day. They didn't need to call each other. They felt each other. Seeing a familiar silhouette approaching in the window, Stephen ran out of the apartment, ran up the stairs, came out of the entrance exactly at the moment when Emily was 3 meters away from him. The girl joyfully pounced on Stephen, kissed his cheeks, eyes, nose, smoothly moving to his lips. While Stephen was on sick leave, he didn't want them to kiss, afraid of infecting Emily. But she didn't care. She confirmed that contagion doesn't stick to advance. Afterwards, she laughed and pounced on his lips as if she hadn't seen them in forever. During the passionate kiss, the young people did not notice anything around them. The gray cityscape turned into the natural world always becomes much brighter when a loved one is near us. Yes, it was the beloved Stephen who confessed his feelings to Emily on the 3rd day of the hospital stay. This fact did not shock her. She, of course, reciprocated his feelings. Even though they had only known each other for a week, both of them were sure that this love was for life, and they wanted to get married as soon as possible. Emily was already prepared for the fact that the proposal would be made not by Stephen to her, but by her to him. But still, she was waiting for a man to take that step. Camille spent a lot of time at work, tried to lead a social life, but that day she was ashamed of the fact that at home there is a sick son who needs her care, and she instead has fun with girlfriends. After quickly saying goodbye, the woman gathered all her things. She ran to the store to buy groceries to prepare a delicious dinner. She wanted to give her son a little feast. She hurried home with all her legs, and when she wrapped up in her yard, she saw that under the driveway young people hugging, kissing. Wow, they couldn't find any other place. How are people supposed to walk? She did not want to scandalize, as she was in a good mood, and decided to make a simple remark. "Guys, why are you standing here in broad daylight in full view of everyone?" Camille said without raising her eyes, and ran into the entrance. "Mom, meet Emily." Camille was dumbfounded. She thought she had imagined it. Standing there, afraid to turn around, she couldn't believe it. After all, her son was sick, should be lying in bed waiting for her. "Mom," without letting go of Emily's embrace, repeated Stephen. "Why aren't you in bed?" Stephen released his lover from his embrace, walked up to his mother, took her by the elbow, and took her aside. "I don't understand. What kind of concerts are these? What do you allow yourself? I'm introducing you to a dear person, and you act like she's not even there. How am I supposed to act? Should I welcome her with open arms? Who is she? She's nobody. Look at the way the girl looks. Would an intelligent person wear such a vulgar dress? And what's that on her head? It's horrible. Where did you find her? Did you pick her up like a slit in a garbage dump?" After these words, Stephen was overcome by a wave of rage. No one dare speak of his favorite person in such a tone. His hand twitched, barely missed. The young man came to his senses. Raising a hand on his mother is not allowed, and in general on anyone. Stephen turned around and walked towards Emily. His face had never looked so ugly with anger. Emily was frightened. Stepping up close, Stephen grabbed the girl's arm so that she shrieked a little. The reaction was one of fear and pain. His hand clenched tighter. The guy didn't see anyone or anything around him. Only when Emily started to cry did he abruptly let her go. I'm sorry, honey. I didn't mean to." The girl broke into sobs, covering her face with her hands. No one had ever treated her like this before. She didn't understand why it had happened. After all, she had done nothing wrong. Tears were flowing not only because Stephen had grabbed her and hurt her, but also because of Camille's reaction. "Honey, please don't cry. I'm sorry I hurt you. I didn't know what I was doing. She just made me angry," Stephen said, pointing in the direction where his mother was standing. "Why is she angry without stopping to cry?" asked Emily. "I don't know. She doesn't need an excuse to turn into Miguel." Stephen cradled Emily, kissed the top of her head. There was a lump in my throat again, this guilt that wouldn't let up. Her heartbeat quickened with anxiety. Nausea kicked in. The young man was determined. "Sweetheart, it's going to be all right. I'll do everything I can to make us happy. We just have to wait a little longer. Do you believe me?" "I do, darling. I do." The lovers stayed together for about another hour. After that, Stephen saw the girl off and went home to talk to his mom and start forging his own happiness. "God, I really am a mama's boy. I'm almost 30 years old, and I still haven't learned to live on my own, to make my own decisions. I have to figure out something to make my girl happy, to make me happy. After all, how to talk to her mother. I have no idea what language I can use to convey my thoughts to her. Doesn't she want her son to be happy? Every mother wants that. She just doesn't understand me because we haven't talked enough. I just need to spend a nice evening with her." Stephen thought that today he could settle the relationship with his mother, which had not been formed for many years, to immediately flush her Zamomu. So to speak, the young man on the way home stopped by the flower store. On the shelves of the refrigerator were dozens of vases with a variety of flowers. But Camille's most favorite plants were chrysanthemums. There was no preference of any kind for the color. At first, Stephen wanted to collect all varieties of these flowers in a bouquet, but thought that it would look like something defiant. Mom's nervous system was already upset. Together with the salesman, they chose chrysanthemums in bed colors. The bouquet was chic and expensive, but Stephen spared no expense. It was for his beloved mom. To be more precise, it's for his carefree future. The bouquet was just under 1 meter in diameter. When Stephen saw it, he thought he couldn't carry it home on his own. But it was necessary to walk less than 500 meters. Entering the entrance, the young man stopped and leaned against the wall. His arms were tired, his back grimaced. There was not much left to do. Gathering all the strength in a heap, Stephen made one last dash. The door to the apartment was locked. It was impossible to hold the keys. It was impossible to reach, as he held the bouquet with both hands. I had to knock. The choice fell on his foot, gently hitting the door a few times. Stephen froze in anticipation of footsteps not being heard. Tried again. Silence. With all his might, hitting the door, he heard quick footsteps. "What on earth is going on?" mumbled Camille as he ran to the door and turned the lock. "Why are you banging like that? Are you out of your mind?" Oops, when the door opened, she saw a huge bouquet of her favorite flowers. "What's that? Who is it?" Blurry smiles, asked the woman. "It's for you, Mom. I tried and picked the best flowers for you. We had an unpleasant conversation this afternoon. You were in a bad mood. I thought I'd make it better for you. Did it work? I'm glad you came to your senses and admitted you were wrong." "Mom, that's not what I meant. Why was I wrong? Let's go into the kitchen and have some tea." Put the flowers in the vase. Camille grabbed the bouquet and went into the hall with it. There, among the variety of you, tried to choose the one in which the bouquet would look more advantageous. Meanwhile, Sturhenna's head was busy thinking about how to convince his mother to leave him alone. It seemed impossible, but he wasn't going to give up. Dialogues were turning in his head, which by all the rules of life would never happen. Even if you think of many variants of the event, it will still turn out something you did not count on. Oh, son, that's good. You made your mom happy, of course. Thank you so much. My favorite colors and shades are so beautiful. After all, a mother is never wrong. I always said you had good taste. It's just that after I saw your mom, I started to doubt you. But I figured it was just a temporary blur. Mom, stop calling love a blur. What love? What do you know about love? You're almost 30 years old, but you've never had a girlfriend. How do you know? Oh, I'm sorry. Camille shrieked and threw her hands up in the air. Did you sit in your room all day, or did you disappear to the institute? And where did you hide it if you had it under your desk, under your bed? Okay, everybody, let's stop this pointless conversation. I wanted to talk to you about my relationship with Emily. Oh my God, what relationship with Emily? Please, it's just a casual attraction. Son, now, after a couple nights together, you'll forget her as the most interesting book you have on your bottom shelf, floor-level shelves. You won't even lose dust in there. That's how it's gonna be with this sucker. No, you listen to me. You know, I've never felt what I'm feeling right now in my life. No girl has ever captured my attention and captured my mind and my heart. You see, she and I are soulmates. We had a lot in common. A love of art, books, animals. Can you understand what I'm saying? I'm asking you to stop following my every move and let me start living on my own. If you are afraid that I don't make mistakes, then don't worry. They will be my mistakes that I will learn from. You've hardly lived the life your grandmother told you to live. As far as I remember from your childhood, you were always willful, and never in your life did you do as your grandmother told you. You did the opposite. Even when you knew it wouldn't end well, you did it out of spite. Just think about the time I was at my grandmother's house this weekend. And when I met you, she said I was probably allergic to citrus fruits. You screamed that it wasn't true. And the rash that formed on me is common. That same evening, you fed me oranges. And 2 o'clock later, I was in the hospital with a pharmacy receipt. That's not normal. But you thought you did the right thing, because you had to see if Granny was right or not. Camille listened and stared intently into Stephen's eyes. She couldn't believe that her son remembered this moment in his life, because he was only 4 years old. And after being discharged from the hospital, no one ever brought up the situation. And even now, my mom didn't feel guilty. It was a good thing after all. What else does he need? What kind of independence can we talk about if Stephen did not live a day without his mom? He even refused to go to camps because he was afraid of a long separation from his mother. Stephen continued his monologue, trying to make many arguments for the fact that he was ready to get off the tit and go into life without his mom. Camille realized that the son was serious. The usual methods of influencing him would not work. There was no point in throwing another tantrum. A more cunning plan could have been devised. Stephen was more loyal to his mother when she spoke in a calm and affirmative tone. But even that was not enough now. If she kept talking about her son's failure as an independent man, he would become hysterical, and God forbid, he would get angry and leave home. Such a turn of events she did not survive, having listened to her son to the end. The mother remained silent for a few minutes, trying to digest what he was trying to convey to her. Stephen, you're probably right. What's right? You're a grown man who needs to get out of your parents' house and start building your life brick by brick. Stephen was stunned. He was preparing for the fact that his mother will seize another scandal, will argue that he cannot live without her, and that he needed a wife. But to say that Camille would agree with her son's words, no one could expect that. He looked at her out of the corner of his eye, groped his hand several times to make sure it wasn't a dream. The young man rushed from his seat, hugging his mother. The woman answered him gently, hugging and stroking her son. Only I ask you for one thing. Mother, I will try to do what you ask. There is nothing terrifying in my request. You see, I'm used to you always being at home, putting up with the enormous amount of books that keeps increasing. I can't imagine coming home from work tomorrow, and the house will be empty, with neither you nor your things in it. I wouldn't survive that. All I ask is that you don't rush into moving. Stay with me a little longer." This mother's request was out of Stephen's plans. He was really going to look for a nice apartment tonight, among the ones for rent. He wanted to drive around in the morning, see what was available. Then tonight he'd pack up his things and move in. After that, he'd like to go after Emily and ask her to move in with him. But Mom was partly right about something. She carried him for 9 months under her heart for 29 years, raising him, feeding him, caring for him. If he did that, her feelings would probably be comparable to what women feel when they lose their children. "Okay, Mom, I'll do what you're asking me to do. I just ask that this transition not take months. The most I can offer you is a few weeks. I'm fine with that." "Son, thank you." Although Camille agreed with everything that had been said, she had no intention of stopping. It was early in the morning when Stephen was asleep. She took his phone, found his lover's phone number, wrote it down in her notebook. Toward lunchtime, she decided to call. "Hello." She heard a fragile female voice on the other end of the line. "Smith. Emily." "Yes. Hi, this is Camille, Stephen's mom. I'd like to meet you today." "Something's happened to Stephen?" the girl asked me worriedly. "No, he's sleeping fine. He probably had a fever last night, couldn't sleep. And if he had followed the bed rest that the doctor said, he would have recovered by now." "Oh well, that's not what I'm talking about. When can you honor me with your presence? I'm out of class in half an hour. We can meet outside the institute. There's a coffee shop with great coffee." "Oh, that's great. I'll be there in 5 minutes." When Emily finished talking, I noticed that she was feeling a little heavy. The feeling of unease was growing by the second. After what Camille had done in the yard yesterday, the girl could not expect her to be kind. What if Stephen had talked to her and the woman had decided to get to know her better to understand her son's choice? Yeah, I guess she did. It's weird, but why am I so excited? Although it can be considered the first acquaintance with the future mother-in-law, no daughter-in-law has ever been completely calm before this event. I guess it's a normal feeling. Emily returned to the classroom, where the class was held, began to absorb what was written on the teachers' websites. Thoughts did not leave her head. It was impossible to concentrate. No matter how hard the girl tried to concentrate, everything was in vain. She resigned herself to her condition and just stared at the clock, waiting for the end of the class. After the bell rang, the instructor dismissed the students. Emily leisurely headed towards the exit. She did not want to hurry because the feeling of anxiety had already grown to universal proportions. The way to the cafe, which was located in the park, 200 meters from the institute, took forever. There she saw the familiar silhouette of a middle-aged lady. Yes, it was her. Maybe it's not too late to cancel. If I go now and leave before she saw me, it could be said that I was detained after the lecture. While Emily was turning an escape plan in her head, Camille turned around and saw her. The girl stood there like a dumbfounded and didn't understand what she should do, where to run to. Maybe she hadn't noticed her yet. The woman gracefully raised her hand and waved everything. There were no more options. If she ran away now, it would mean she would completely ruin her relationship with her lover's mom. Emily shifted with difficulty. Her legs were leaden. Every step was like torture. When the girl came close, it felt as if she was about to faint. "Hello, Emily." "Hello, Camille." Stammering, the girl replied. "Let's go to the cafe." They were both silent until they sat down at a table. After ordering, the woman spoke. "Emily, you know, I'm very glad that my son has you. I honestly thought he was more interested in the book world than the real world. I don't know what's so special about you, but I'm happy he's starting to live. But all people are unique and beautiful in their own way. Some people can't understand another person's choices. Yeah, you're right. You must be able to do something my son never dreamed of before," Camille said with a wry smile. Emily felt uncomfortable. How dare this woman say such things to her? She was clearly alluding to sex and everything that went with it. The snag was that the young people had nothing going on yet. Yes, that's what happens in the modern world when a woman doesn't jump on a man in the first hour of meeting him. It was more than that. Camille, I'm sorry, but it's indecent to talk about such things. And if it bothers you that much, yes, I care a great deal. Stephen's mother started to raise her voice. There was nothing going on between me and Stephen yet. Yeah, but all the better. What do you mean? That he won't be in so much pain after the breakup. You see, my dear, if there's been intimacy between young people, there's a special bond between them. I'm sorry. After what breakup? What are you talking about? That's what I called you here to talk to you about. Honey, you're not our kind of girl. I figured you out when I first heard about you, and when I saw you, all my fears were confirmed. Stephen is the son of a great, not afraid of this word, engineer known not only in Russia, but in many countries of the world. He's an intelligent boy, you know. And now look at yourself. At that moment, Emily turned her head to the right. There on the wall was a mirror. She looked at her reflection, saw exactly what she had seen an hour and a half ago. Maybe her mascara was running. I don't think so. Camille, I look at myself in the mirror 100 times a day. I don't see any signs of ugliness, sty, or inferiority. Appearance. I'm wearing a flowered dress on my head. What are you? A milkmaid? I guess I'm guessing. Before you went to college, by some miracle you ate cows in your village. No, I came from a regional town, Emily replied dryly. What, you didn't go to school in the region? You decided to come to a small town. What is that nonsense? Yes, I did. I wanted to get out of my parents' house, so I came here. Are you even telling the truth? I'm telling the truth. Why would I open up to someone I don't know very well? Plus, I'm happy with the way I look, just like your son. Oh, let's drop it. You're the one who's stupid. I'll continue, if you don't mind. You see, Stephen was only interested in you until he took you to bed. I'm sure that after he's had a few times of getting what he dreams of, all his made-up feelings, and vaporized, he won't need you. No one knows a child as well as his mother who has lived under the same roof with him all his life. Emily, I understand why you chose my son. He deserves the attention of the best women. Not that you're on that list, but still. Emily sat there, not moving. The coffee had gone cold. She couldn't get a word in edgewise. She did not understand how from the mouth of such a well-mannered woman, at first glance, could fly such disgusting words that she allowed herself. Why had she descended almost to direct insults? These questions lingered in her mind. She had no idea what was going on right now. Meanwhile, Camille continued her tirade. I'm sorry your plan didn't work out, but I must confess that Stephen already has a fiancée. But he's been very upset with her because of you. Well, I'm willing to bend at the knees to beg her forgiveness. His future is firmly entwined with the kitten, not you. Just suck it up and let him go. Just disappear. I realize that's impossible because he's your teacher. But think of something. I hope the villagers are logical and you'll make the right decision. After these words, Camille elegantly got up from the table, carefully threw her coat on her shoulders and left. Emily sat there, hardly breathing. What was that? And what am I supposed to do after that? The girl felt as if she had been doused in mud from head to toe. What is there to say? According to Stephen's mother, she was the dirt that could not be washed away. The woman considered her son's relationship with the girl as something criminal and ugly. I think it would stigmatize the boy for the rest of his life. Emily realized one thing: Stephen had a strong bond with his mother. Tears sprang from her eyes and wouldn't stop flowing. She didn't understand why the woman didn't accept her. She didn't even ask who her father and mother were, nor did she inquire about her reason for moving to the small town. As much as it hurt Emily, she had to make a difficult decision. The next day, Stephen woke up early in the morning, went to the bread store to get a loaf to please herself and her mother, delicious breakfast sandwiches. On his way back, he decided to check the mail. To his surprise, There was a letter there. It was unmarked, only in the middle of the envelope. One word, Stephen, was written in calligraphic handwriting. He couldn't help himself and tore the envelope open on the spot. It contained a letter from Emily. "Hello, Stephen. I hope you are almost recovered. I'm sorry I didn't come by to check on you. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to hold back and shed tears on your t-shirt. I won't beat around the bush. Oh, around. I have to tell you that I'm leaving for my house at 500 hours today. It's an emergency. We need to end our relationship. I really do love you very much. I've never been so attracted to anyone before. I wondered why we hadn't met sooner. I came to the conclusion that it was the age difference, which, by the way, I didn't feel at all. It's just that when you were a young guy, I was on the potty. The day before, your mom called me and asked me to meet you. I said yes. If I'd known how this would turn out, I never would have agreed to it in my life. I've been dragged through the mud. I don't think I'll be able to feel normal for months. Camille tells me you already have a fiancé. I'll be honest, I hate to hear it from a stranger. She said I wasn't worthy of you. Well, so be it. Your mom thinks I was signed for self-interest. When I started a relationship with you, it was like I had my eye on your apartment. Honey, I'm gonna have to lay it all on the line. I didn't say anything about Camille last night because she was impossible to interrupt. I have a full family: Mom, Dad, me, and my sister. Mom works as a director of the best high school in the region. My sister studies at the same lyceum. My daddy is a regular governor. I think if your mom knew that, I'd be the best match she's got for you. It's my dad's status that made him hard on me. Everyone there knows me by sight. Since our family photos are in the papers, so I decided to move to your town to be more free. But even there was a man who broke my wings. So I'd rather go back home. It hurts to say goodbye to you, but I don't see any other way out. I hope you can get away from your mother and make a life for yourself. Choose your own wife, job, and home. I wish you all the best. I hope you'll remember me with a kind word. I only ask one thing. Don't look for me. Don't try. I don't want us to have anything to do with each other. I'm not ready to build a family with a man and his mother. They shouldn't be on the same level. I still love you. Your fox on Emily. Stephen was devastated. While he was reading the letter, he didn't notice the button fall out of his hands and onto the coffee tile in the entryway. He didn't bother picking it up, clutching the letter in his hands, headed for his apartment. His mom was still asleep. He needed to think it over. The guy was very hurt. He did not expect such a turn of fate. He could not think that he and Emily would ever part. Only death could separate them. But things turned out very differently. Of course, he looked for someone to blame. In his opinion, it was both Emily and Camille. Mother had insolently meddled in their relationship, and Emily had betrayed him. Yes, she had betrayed him, because she could have told him who she was in the first place. Even though Stephen didn't care, it was important to his mother. If she had immediately found out who her father was, she would not have opposed their relationship at all. It wasn't until he was 30 that a guy got his heart broken for the first time. He realized it wasn't the only time. In his lifetime, it would be. But to minimize the risk, he'd have to make up his mind. Getting away from Camille wasn't easy. I have to move out right now. Full of determination, Stephen got up from the couch, went to the storage room where the suitcases were kept. He packed only the most necessary things and left his parents' house for nowhere. He decided that he would check into the first apartment he could find today. And if it didn't work out, he would temporarily move in with his father, who was on a business trip. Camille woke up half an hour later. After Stephen had left, there was a pleasant aroma of fried eggs in the apartment, the unfinished breakfast that the young man was preparing. Stephen tried to shout to her son, the woman. No one answered. She assumed the young man had gone to get bread and went into the kitchen to make coffee on the bar. Lying crumpled was a piece of paper. As she got closer, she realized it was a letter. Yes, reading other people's letters was not allowed. But Camille did not hold back. At first, there was a wide smile on her face. She was satisfied that she was able to achieve what she wanted. But near the end of the letter, her emotions changed. It was shock mixed with sadness. When she reached the end, Camille realized how much she had miscalculated. Emily was a willful girl, and she would never forgive a woman, no matter how much she begged, even if she got down on her knees. It wasn't until later that she realized she'd lost something important. She had lost her son. It was clear that he had left home. The woman rushed to the phone to dial him, but the caller was out of range. Tears flowed from her eyes. Camille had always been afraid that Stephen would move out on her. She had expected to live with him forever, even when he got married. However, things had turned out very differently. She was left alone and with nothing, like an old woman at a broken trough.